Chapter 1. The Broken Vows. Emily Grant stood at the edge of the kitchen, her hands clutching the counter as if it was the only solid thing in her world. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of something she hadn't yet fully processed. The morning sunlight streamed in through the windows, casting golden squares across the tiled floor, a stark contrast to the darkness she felt spreading inside her. The cheerful clinking of the coffee pot preparing her morning brew sounded oddly out of place in the silence that had settled between these walls. She glanced across the room, to the small table where she and Daniel once shared breakfasts, planning their days, their weekends, and sometimes even their future. But today, that future seemed to have crumbled like dried leaves beneath her feet, blown away by the gust of a secret she had never expected. Emily's eyes caught a glint on her finger, the gold band that now felt like a chain around her heart. Her thoughts flashed back to the day Daniel had slipped it on, promising love and faithfulness. She reached into the drawer, her hand trembling as she pulled out a crumpled envelope. Inside it was a photograph, one she had found while tidying up his study the night before. It was nothing more than a casual shot of Daniel with a woman she didn't recognize. The woman's head was tilted back in laughter, her hand resting casually on Daniel's shoulder. Emily's fingers traced the edge of the photo, as if trying to erase the woman's presence from it. But the intimacy of their smiles told a different story, one that shattered the fabric of the life she thought they had built. Her legs grew weak, and she sank down to the cool kitchen tiles, her back against the cabinets. The reality of Daniel's betrayal crashed over her like a wave, leaving her struggling for air. Her mind replayed the countless moments they had shared, the nights spent wrapped in each other's warmth, the quiet Sunday mornings, the plans for a life that now seemed like an illusion. And now, the silence between them was not one of comfort, but a canyon she couldn't cross. She sat there for hours, surrounded by the ticking of the clock and the hum of the refrigerator. The coffee pot clicked off, but she didn't move to pour a cup. She stared at the photograph, willing it to disappear, but it remained stubbornly real, its edges biting into her palm. Emily could almost hear the phantom echoes of laughter that filled the space where Daniel's voice used to be. She had believed in their love so fiercely, and now that belief seemed to mock her. By the time she found the strength to rise, the sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the floor. She walked through the house, each room a reminder of what they once had. She paused in the living room, her eyes drifting to the mantel where their wedding photo sat. Daniel's arm wrapped around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest, both of them grinning like they had the world in their hands. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the cool glass frame. Then, without thinking, she turned it face down. Upstairs, their bedroom felt colder than it had ever been. Emily sat at the edge of the bed, her side, the side she had always claimed, feeling like a distant shore. She could almost feel Daniel's presence in the space beside her, but now it seemed hollow, a reminder of the promises he had broken. She reached for the nightstand drawer, pulling out a small, velvet box. Inside was the necklace Daniel had given her on their first anniversary, a silver chain with a tiny heart-shaped pendant. She pressed it between her fingers, the metal cool against her skin, but its weight felt like a lie now, a symbol of something that no longer existed. Tears she hadn't realized she'd been holding back finally slipped down her cheeks, a slow, quiet stream. She lay back against the pillows, curling into herself as the grief flowed freely. Memories crowded her mind, each one cutting like glass. Daniel's hand in hers on a crowded street, the way he'd surprise her with flowers after a long week, the nights they'd stayed up talking about their dreams. And now, a different image imposed itself over those memories. The photograph of a stranger laughing with her husband, as if Emily's life had been rewritten without her consent. She knew she couldn't stay there forever, trapped in the ache of what she had lost, But for now, she let herself feel it all. The tears soaked into the fabric of her pillow, and the world outside continued its rhythm. Birds chirping in the trees, the distant rumble of cars, the ordinary life she used to know. But Emily's life was no longer ordinary. It had been cracked open, the pieces scattered in all directions, and she had no idea how to gather them up again. She stayed in that bed until the sky outside the window darkened, turning to shades of violet and deep blue. The house grew dim, the evening creeping in, but she didn't bother turning on the lights. She just lay there, her hand resting over her chest, feeling the dull thud of her heart, steady yet burdened by every beat. Emily finally forced herself to sit up, the weight of her sorrow pressing against her shoulders. She looked around the room, at the photos that dotted the walls, at the small tokens of a life she had thought was full. She reached for the velvet box once more and closed it tightly. Then, with a deep breath, she placed it back in the drawer and pushed it shut, her hand lingering on the wood for a moment longer. The night outside was still and quiet as she descended the stairs, leaving the darkness behind her. She stepped into the kitchen once more, reaching for a glass of water, her hands no longer trembling. As she drank, her eyes settled on the crumpled photograph, now resting alone on the counter. She picked it up and tucked it into the envelope, sealing away the image of a life she could no longer recognize. She placed the envelope in the back of a drawer, out of sight but not out of mind. For now, she would put one foot in front of the other, even if she had no idea where that path would lead. And as she stood in the silent kitchen, the first stars appearing beyond the window, Emily felt the smallest flicker of resolve take root in her chest, fragile and uncertain, but there nonetheless. Chapter 2. A Silent Betrayal. In the days that followed her discovery, Emily moved through the world as if underwater, everything muffled, slow, and distorted. The life that had once felt so familiar to her now seemed like a stage set for a play she no longer recognized. The routines of daily life carried on, but the meaning behind each action felt hollow, like the echo of a song that had lost its melody. She wandered the house, drifting from room to room as if searching for a version of herself she might have misplaced. In the mornings, she would make the bed, her hands smoothing over the sheets on Daniel's side, feeling the cold emptiness that lingered where his warmth used to be. She would stare at the pillow, now undented, as if expecting it to give some sign of what had changed. But it remained stubbornly flat, like the silence that now stretched between them. On the third day, she found herself standing before their closet, her eyes tracing the line of Daniel's shirts, hung neatly beside her own. She reached out, touching the fabric of a dress shirt she had ironed for him countless times before, the crisp cotton smooth under her fingertips. It still held the faint scent of his cologne, a fragrance that once made her feel secure. Now, it only reminded her of the nights he had come home late, offering hurried excuses she had never questioned. Her fingers tightened around the fabric, a wave of anger surging up inside her, surprising her with its heat. She yanked the shirt off its hanger and tossed it to the floor, then another and another, until a small pile lay at her feet, a tangle of blue and white. For a moment, she stood over them, her breath coming fast, and then she crumpled to her knees. Emily pressed her face into her hands, her body shaking with the force of her grief. But even then, no sound escaped her. Only the silent, heaving breaths of a woman too tired to scream. She sat there for what felt like hours, surrounded by the discarded clothes, each piece a reminder of how her life had unraveled. When she finally stood, her legs unsteady beneath her, she gathered up the shirts with trembling hands and shoved them back into the closet, not caring that they hung unevenly. She closed the door with a sharp snap, sealing away the evidence of her outburst, but she knew she couldn't shut away the hurt that easily. By evening, She found herself outside, drawn by the cool air that brushed against her skin, a relief against the suffocating heat of her thoughts. The backyard stretched out before her, a small patch of green that she and Daniel had tended together over the years. The rose bushes she had planted in the first year of their marriage stood like sentinels along the fence, their blooms heavy with summer's last breath. Emily crouched beside one of them, her fingers grazing the velvety petals, the deep red reminding her of the roses Daniel used to bring her on their anniversary. He had always been thoughtful, remembering the little things, until he hadn't. She reached for a pruning shear from the garden box and began cutting away the wilting blooms, one by one, dropping them into a pile at her feet. Her movements were precise, mechanical, each snip a small release of the tension that coiled inside her. She thought of the photograph hidden in the drawer, of Daniel's arm around that other woman, and each cut felt like a small act of defiance, a refusal to let those memories take root in her mind. The evening sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the yard. The air grew cooler, and Emily finally put down the shears, wiping her hands on her jeans. She looked around at the garden she had shaped with her own hands, a place that once symbolized growth and love. Now, it felt like a graveyard, each flower bed a memory she didn't know how to tend anymore. She straightened up and walked back inside, her hands streaked with dirt, her mind as raw as the pruned branches outside. The house greeted her with its usual silence, a stillness that seemed almost accusatory. She passed the living room where she had once curled up with Daniel to watch movies, his arm wrapped around her shoulders, his presence warm and steady. But now, she couldn't even bring herself to sit on the couch. It felt too much like sharing a space with a ghost. In the kitchen, she moved through the motions of making dinner, chopping vegetables with a force that sent each piece skittering across the cutting board. The rhythmic thud of the knife was the only sound that filled the air, and she clung to it, letting it drown out the thoughts swirling in her mind. When the food was ready, she set a single plate at the table, the empty chair across from her a sharp reminder of the absence she still couldn't quite believe. Emily ate slowly, her appetite dulled by the weight in her chest. She pushed the food around her plate, her mind drifting back to the dinners she and Daniel used to share. How he would lean back in his chair, talking about his day, how he'd always reach across the table to steal a bite of whatever she was eating. But those moments felt distant now, like scenes from a life that had slipped away from her grasp. After clearing the dishes, she returned to the bedroom, her steps dragging against the carpeted hallway. She sat at the vanity, her reflection staring back at her, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, hair pulled back in a careless ponytail. She hardly recognized herself in the woman who gazed back. There was a dullness to her that she had never seen before, a shadow that clung to the corners of her expression. Emily pulled open the drawer where she had hidden the photograph, her hand hovering over the envelope. She didn't take it out this time, just rested her fingers against its edge, feeling the sharp paper press against her skin. She thought of Daniel, of how he had once been her entire world, and of the stranger he had become. She wondered if he even realized what he had done to her, how deep the wound he had carved into her heart went. She closed the drawer, sealing the envelope away once more. Then, she rose and crossed the room to the window. Outside, the sky was a blanket of stars, a cold, distant light that offered no comfort. She pressed her forehead against the glass, her breath misting the pain as she stared out at the night. Somewhere in the city, Daniel was out there, living a life that had diverged so painfully from hers. She wondered if he ever thought of her, or if he had already moved on, leaving her to carry the weight of their shattered vows alone. As the night deepened, Emily slipped beneath the covers, her body sinking into the mattress that suddenly felt too large, too empty. She lay there, staring at the ceiling, counting the shadows that flickered with each passing car outside. Her thoughts drifted, restless and aching, until finally exhaustion pulled her into a fitful sleep. But even in her dreams, there was no escape. She found herself standing in their home, the rooms echoing with memories that no longer felt like hers. She wandered through corridors that stretched on endlessly, each corner revealing another glimpse of the life she had lost. Daniel's laughter, the warmth of his touch, the comfort of his presence. But each time she reached out, he slipped further away, until all she was left with was the emptiness of a home that no longer felt like hers. And when she awoke, the dawn light streaming through the window, she realized that the silence between them was no longer just an absence of words. It was a chasm that separated who she had been from who she was becoming. A woman forced to confront the shards of her broken heart, one day at a time. Chapter 3: Shadows of Heartache. Emily's days blended into one another, each filled with the same shadowy ache that had lodged itself deep within her chest. She moved through the hours like a ghost, existing but not truly living, her mind caught in a loop of what-ifs and could-have-beens. The house, which once felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. A place where every room whispered of loss, where even the air seemed to thicken with the weight of memories she couldn't bear to face. On one particularly gray afternoon, Emily found herself in the attic, drawn there by the need to escape the familiar rooms downstairs. She climbed the creaking wooden steps, the sound echoing through the silence, each step a reminder of how empty the house felt without Daniel's presence filling it. Dust motes swirled in the pale light streaming through the small attic window, and the air smelled faintly of old wood and forgotten seasons. She knelt down before a row of boxes, each one labeled in her own neat handwriting. Christmas, Summer Vacation 2018, Wedding. Her hands hovered over the last box, her breath catching at the sight of the word. It had been years since she'd opened it, but she knew exactly what it contained. Photographs, invitations, cards, all the remnants of the day she had once believed marked the beginning of forever. Emily hesitated, her hand trembling over the lid. Part of her wanted to shove the box away, to bury it beneath all the others and forget that it even existed. But the ache in her chest pushed her forward, urging her to confront what lay inside. She took a deep breath and lifted the lid, revealing a stack of photographs on top, their edges slightly yellowed with time. She picked up the first one, her fingers brushing over the glossy surface. It was a picture of her and Daniel standing outside the chapel, the autumn leaves swirling around them like confetti. They were both smiling, faces flushed with the chill of the air and the warmth of the promises they had made just hours before. Daniel's hand was resting on her waist, pulling her close, and Emily's eyes shone with a joy she could barely remember feeling. One by one, she sifted through the photographs, images of the reception, of their first dance beneath a canopy of twinkling lights, of their families gathered together, all smiles and laughter. Each picture felt like a small wound reopening, the past bleeding into the present, the happiness she had known colliding with the reality of what they had become. She lingered over one photo in particular. Daniel, standing with his arm around her shoulders, his head bent to whisper something in her ear. She couldn't remember what he had said, but she remembered how it had made her feel. Safe, cherished, like they were in on a secret no one else could understand. Now, that feeling seemed as distant as a star in a winter sky. Emily set the photos aside and reached deeper into the box, pulling out their wedding invitation. The elegant script still felt familiar beneath her fingers, the words announcing a union she had believed would last a lifetime. She traced the curve of her own name, then Daniel's, the ink smudged slightly at the edges. She wondered if he had ever looked back at these things, if he had kept a box of his own somewhere, or if he had let those memories slip through his fingers as easily as he had let her go. She placed the invitation back into the box and pushed it to the side, her hands trembling as she tried to close the lid. But her fingers brushed against something else, a small leather-bound journal she had kept during the first year of their marriage. She had almost forgotten about it, but as she flipped through the pages, the memories came flooding back. Notes about their weekends exploring the city, plans for their future, little sketches she had made of Daniel when he wasn't looking. She paused on a page where she had written down a promise Daniel had made to her. "I will always choose you." The words were underlined, the ink dark and deliberate. She remembered how he had said it one night as they lay beneath the stars, his voice steady and sure. At the time, she had believed him completely, her heart swelling with the certainty that they were building something unbreakable. Now, those words felt like a cruel reminder of a promise that had dissolved into dust. Emily's vision blurred, the journal slipping from her hands as she pressed her palms to her eyes. She wished she could turn back time, to reach out to the girl she had been and tell her to hold on tighter, to pay attention to the small cracks before they widened into a chasm. But there was no changing what had happened, no undoing the choices that had led them to this place where she was alone, surrounded by ghosts of the love she had thought would last forever. She took a shuddering breath and closed the journal, placing it back into the box with a kind of reverence, as if laying to rest a part of herself. She sealed the box shut, her hands lingering on the lid before she pushed it back into the shadows of the attic. She couldn't bring herself to throw it away, but she wasn't ready to keep it close either. It would remain here, tucked away among the relics of a past that no longer fit the shape of her life. As she made her way back down the narrow stairs, she caught a glimpse of herself in the hallway mirror. Her face pale, her hair tangled from where she had absently run her fingers through it. The person staring back at her looked older than she remembered, as if the weeks since discovering Daniel's betrayal had etched new lines into her skin, had stolen some of the light from her eyes. Back in the living room, she stood by the window, looking out at the street that stretched beyond their home. A few neighbors walked their dogs, children rode bicycles, and the world went on as if nothing had changed. But Emily knew that everything had changed, that she was no longer the woman she had been when she moved into this house with Daniel, brimming with dreams of a future they would build together. She let her gaze drift toward the small park across the street where she and Daniel used to take evening walks, their hands intertwined, their footsteps falling in sync. The memory twisted inside her like a knife, but she didn't turn away. She forced herself to watch as a young couple strolled by, their arms wrapped around each other, their laughter drifting through the air. It hurt to look, but she needed to remember that kind of closeness, even if it felt like something she might never find again. Emily turned away from the window, moving to the bookshelf that lined one wall of the living room. Her eyes scanned the titles, her fingers trailing over the spines. She pulled out a novel she hadn't read in years, something she had once loved but had forgotten in the busyness of life. She curled up on the corner of the couch, the leather cool against her skin, and opened the book to the first page, hoping to lose herself in someone else's story for a while. But as the words blurred together, her thoughts kept returning to Daniel, to the woman in the photograph, to the life she had built and lost. She wondered how long it would take for the ache to dull, for the shadows that lingered around every corner of her heart to begin to lift. She wondered if there was still a chance for her to find light again, to feel the warmth of love without the sting of betrayal. The afternoon faded into evening, and Emily read until her eyes grew heavy, the house growing darker around her. When she finally closed the book, she realized she couldn't remember a single word of what she had read. But somehow, the act of turning the pages, of holding onto something tangible, had made the silence inside her a little less unbearable. She placed the book back on the shelf and walked up the stairs, pausing in the doorway of the bedroom. The shadows had deepened, casting long, dark lines across the bed. She hesitated, then crossed to the window, pulling the curtains wide open. The moonlight spilled into the room, painting everything in shades of silver, softening the edges of her sorrow. She climbed into bed, curling up beneath the blanket, the cool fabric brushing against her skin. Her mind drifted to the journal in the attic, to the words she had written in the early days of her marriage, and she wondered if she could find new words now, words that might carry her through the darkness. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of something that wasn't quite hope, but wasn't despair either. And as she lay there, listening to the quiet hum of the night, Emily closed her eyes and let the shadows wash over her, knowing that somewhere within them, a new beginning might be waiting. Chapter 4. A stranger in her own home. Emily woke to the pale morning light streaming through the open curtains, casting a soft glow across the bedroom. For a moment, she lay still, cocooned in the warmth of the blankets, letting herself believe that the peace she felt was real. But as her mind began to clear, the familiar ache returned, creeping into her chest like a slow, unwelcome tide. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing the feeling away, but it clung to her, as persistent as ever. She forced herself to get out of bed, her movements slow and mechanical, as if each step was a reminder that she still existed in this place that no longer felt like hers. She walked down the hallway, her bare feet brushing against the cool wood floor, and paused in the doorway of the guest room that Daniel had claimed after their final argument. The bed was neatly made, the room eerily untouched, as if the act of leaving had been an afterthought rather than a choice. Emily's gaze lingered on the dresser, where a small stack of Daniel's things still sat. A watch he had forgotten, a cufflink that had slipped under the corner of a photo frame. She picked up the watch, turning it over in her hand, feeling the smooth curve of the metal against her skin. The clock face ticked away, marking time that felt strangely suspended, each second a reminder of the emptiness he had left behind. She placed the watch back on the dresser, her fingers brushing against the edge of the photo frame beside it. She hadn't noticed the picture before, one of the few they had taken together on their anniversary, smiling in front of a seaside cliff, the wind tossing her hair around her face. Emily's eyes traced the curve of her own smile, the easy way she leaned into Daniel's side, as if they were a part of the landscape itself. It seemed like a different lifetime, a version of herself she could no longer remember how to be. She placed the frame face down on the dresser, leaving the room before the memories could consume her again. Downstairs, the kitchen felt just as silent, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound breaking the stillness. She poured herself a cup of coffee, her hands shaking slightly as she lifted the steaming mug to her lips. She took a slow sip, but the warmth did little to chase away the chill that had settled deep within her. The house felt foreign to her now, each room holding echoes of a life that had slipped through her fingers. The living room, where they had spent so many quiet nights watching movies, was now a place she avoided, the couch too empty, the silence too loud. Even the garden outside, where she had once tended to flowers with Daniel's help, seemed to mock her, the wilting blooms a reflection of the neglect she couldn't seem to shake. Emily took her coffee to the back porch, where the air was cool and heavy with morning dew. She sat down on the old wicker chair that creaked beneath her weight, staring out at the overgrown garden. The roses she had planted last spring had withered away, their petals brown and crumbling, but the wild grasses had thrived in their absence, creeping up the trellis and swallowing the space they once shared. She wondered if she, too, had become like those roses, something delicate, overtaken by the wildness of a world that no longer felt within her control. She finished her coffee slowly, watching as a pair of sparrows darted through the air, their wings catching the morning light. Their movements were quick, darting from branch to branch, and she envied their freedom, their ability to soar beyond the boundaries of the garden. She tried to remember the last time she had felt that kind of weightlessness, when her days hadn't been defined by an aching emptiness, but the memory slipped through her grasp like sand. When the sun climbed higher in the sky, Emily forced herself to move again. She returned inside, setting the empty mug in the sink, and found herself drawn to the small desk in the corner of the dining room. It was cluttered with bills she had yet to sort through, letters that had piled up in the weeks since Daniel had left. She began to sift through them, her fingers brushing against the familiar paper textures, but her thoughts drifted to the life that continued to exist just beyond the walls of this house. She imagined Daniel in his new apartment across town, waking up to a morning routine that no longer included her. She pictured him making coffee in a different kitchen, brushing his teeth in a mirror that didn't reflect her beside him. She wondered if he thought of her as he went about his day, if he felt the same shadows clinging to him that she couldn't seem to escape. But she knew the answer before she even finished the thought. If he had cared, he wouldn't have left so easily, wouldn't have found a new life without her. Emily reached for the last envelope in the stack, her hand trembling as she recognized the neat script of her mother's handwriting. She hesitated before opening it, unfolding the letter carefully, as if it might shatter under her touch. Her mother's words flowed across the page, filled with concern and advice, the kind she had always offered, even when Emily hadn't asked for it. But between the lines, Emily could sense the unspoken worry, the fear that she might never find her way back from the darkness that had settled over her life. She folded the letter back up, slipping it into a drawer, and tried to push away the guilt that gnawed at her. She knew her mother meant well, but she couldn't bear the thought of being pitted, of becoming a subject of whispered conversations and sad glances. She wanted to believe that she could find her way through this alone, that she could rebuild something new from the ruins of her heart. But some days, the weight of that hope felt as heavy as the grief itself. Emily spent the rest of the afternoon sorting through the clutter, trying to bring order to a life that felt beyond her control. She stacked bills in neat piles, dusted off the shelves, and rearranged the books that lined the walls of the study. Each task offered a brief respite from the ache inside her, a momentary distraction that allowed her to believe she was moving forward. But as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, she felt the emptiness return, settling around her like an unwelcome companion. She made herself dinner, a simple meal that she barely tasted, and ate in silence at the kitchen table. The room seemed too large without Daniel's presence filling it, the echoes of their shared meals lingering in the corners. She washed the dishes slowly, scrubbing each plate until it shone, as if the act could cleanse away the traces of him that still lingered in the air. Night fell, and Emily wandered through the house, turning on lamps to push back the gathering darkness. She paused at the entrance to the living room, her gaze drifting to the framed photo on the mantel, one of the few she hadn't yet put away. It was a picture of her and Daniel at their last summer barbecue, standing beside the grill with matching aprons, both of them laughing at some long-forgotten joke. She remembered how he had wrapped an arm around her shoulders that day, how she had leaned into him, feeling a warmth she hadn't thought could ever fade. Now, that warmth was gone, replaced by the chill of an empty house and the knowledge that she was a stranger within its walls. She turned away from the photo, leaving the living room behind, and climbed the stairs to the bedroom. The air felt colder up here, the shadows deeper, but she didn't close the curtains. Instead, she let the moonlight spill across the floor, a reminder that some things remained constant, even when everything else felt like it was slipping away. She lay down on the bed, curling up beneath the blankets, the silence pressing in around her. Her mind drifted back to the garden, to the wild grasses that had overtaken the roses she had once nurtured. Perhaps she, too, could learn to grow in unexpected places, to find beauty in the chaos that had become her life. Perhaps, beyond the shadows of heartache, There was a part of herself she had yet to discover, a part that could still bloom in the face of loss. As she closed her eyes, she clung to that thought, letting it guide her into the quiet darkness, where the shadows softened and the ache in her chest loosened, just enough for her to catch a breath that didn't hurt. And in the stillness, she found the smallest glimmer of something that felt like hope, a whisper of a promise that maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to belong in her own life once more. Chapter 5. The Weight of Yesterday. Emily woke before dawn, the darkness still heavy around her, a quiet blanket that held the world in suspension. She lay in bed for a moment, listening to the faint hum of the heater, the steady ticking of the clock on the bedside table, each sound amplifying the silence that filled the house. The emptiness had grown more familiar over the past weeks, but it hadn't grown easier. It clung to her, a constant reminder of all that had changed since Daniel's departure. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, trying to push away the fog of sleep that clung to her mind. The night's dreams lingered at the edges of her thoughts, blurred images of a life that felt distant and unreachable, like something seen through a pane of frosted glass. She shook her head, dismissing the lingering sadness that threatened to pull her back under, and forced herself to get up. She made her way downstairs, flipping on lights as she went, chasing away the lingering shadows. In the kitchen, she filled the kettle with water and set it on the stove, the sound of the bubbling heat filling the quiet space. She watched as steam began to curl into the air, a thin wisp that dissipated into nothingness, much like the traces of warmth she once felt in this home. Emily wrapped herself in a thick cardigan, tugging it tightly around her shoulders, and carried her cup of tea to the back porch. The chill of the morning air seeped through her clothes, biting at her skin, but she welcomed the sharpness. It was a reminder that she was still here, still feeling, even when everything else felt numb. She sat down on the wicker chair, the seat groaning under her weight, and watched as the sky slowly shifted from black to a pale, bruised blue. The garden lay shrouded in a layer of frost, the once vibrant leaves curled and brittle, the flowers long gone. The grass shimmered under the weak light, each blade coated in a delicate glaze, fragile and crystalline. She imagined how Daniel would have stood beside her in moments like this, pointing out the way the ice glittered in the early light, his breath fogging in the cold air. But now, there was no one beside her, only the echo of his absence in the spaces they used to share. As the sun began to rise, casting its pale light across the backyard, Emily felt a strange heaviness settle over her. She had spent so much time trying to move forward, to piece together the fragments of her life that Daniel's betrayal had shattered. But no matter how many tasks she filled her days with, how many hours she spent in the company of chores and routines, the weight of what she had lost remained. It pressed against her chest, a constant ache that refused to be ignored. She turned her gaze toward the far corner of the garden, where a small shed stood half-hidden beneath a tangle of ivy. It was a place she had avoided since Daniel's departure, a space that held too many memories of the life they had built together. But today, something inside her shifted, a small, stubborn resolve that urged her to confront the things she had buried. She stood up, setting her empty cup on the railing, and made her way across the frost-covered lawn. The shed door creaked as she pushed it open, the sound breaking the stillness like a crack in glass. Inside, the air was musty and cold, filled with the scent of damp wood and forgotten tools. Dust motes danced in the beams of light that filtered through the cracks in the roof, creating a hazy, otherworldly glow. Emily's breath formed small clouds in the air as she stepped inside, her footsteps crunching against the brittle leaves that had blown in through the gaps. She ran her fingers over the workbench, tracing the outline of old tools that Daniel had left behind. A hammer, a set of wrenches, a box of nails. They were coated in a fine layer of dust, as if time had settled over them in her absence. She picked up an old gardening glove, turning it over in her hand, and remembered the evenings they had spent here together, planning the next additions to their garden, dreaming of the life they would grow between the rows of flowers and vegetables. But those dreams had withered, like the roses outside, leaving only the dry husks of what might have been. She tossed the glove back onto the bench and turned to the shelves that lined the far wall. Boxes of old mementos sat stacked haphazardly, their labels faded and yellowed with age. Emily pulled one down, brushing away the dust, and opened the lid. Inside, she found pieces of a life that seemed to belong to someone else. A postcard from their honeymoon in Italy, faded photographs of their first home, the keys to the car they had traded in years ago. She sifted through them slowly, each item a reminder of a chapter in their shared story, a time when she had believed in forever. But now, those memories felt like echoes in a room long abandoned, distant and unreachable. She came across a small notebook tucked at the bottom of the box, the leather cover worn from years of use. It was Daniel's journal, the one he had kept since they first met, filling its pages with sketches and notes about their plans for the future. She hesitated before opening it, unsure if she wanted to see what he had left behind, but curiosity won out. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning over sketches of garden layouts, lists of things they had wanted to do together, a new flower bed, a trip to the coast, a renovation of the guest room. But as she neared the end, she found notes written in a different, more hurried hand. The words were disjointed, a jumble of thoughts that spoke of uncertainty and guilt, of decisions that he hadn't known how to make. Her heart clenched as she realized these entries were from the time before he had left, when he must have been struggling with the choices that had torn their life apart. It felt like peering into a part of him she had never known, a glimpse of a man who had been caught between love and betrayal. She closed the journal, setting it back in the box, and leaned against the workbench, closing her eyes against the flood of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. It would have been easier to hate him, to let anger consume the space he had left behind. But beneath the pain, there was still a part of her that remembered the way he had once held her, the way he had whispered promises into the quiet spaces of their life. And that made it so much harder to let go. The sun had climbed higher by the time she left the shed, casting long shadows across the lawn. She paused in the doorway, taking one last look at the cluttered space, and felt a strange sense of finality settle over her. She closed the door behind her, the latch clicking into place, and turned back toward the house, feeling the weight of the past press against her shoulders. But as she walked across the yard, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A small patch of green pushing up through the frost, a cluster of tiny, stubborn shoots. They were hidden beneath the tangled grass, almost lost in the chaos of the overgrown garden. But they were there, reaching for the weak winter sun. She knelt down beside them, her breath catching in her chest, and brushed away the leaves that had gathered around their base. She didn't know what kind of plant they were, perhaps a remnant of last year's garden, or a wildflower that had found a place to grow in the neglected soil. But their presence filled her with a strange, unexpected hope, a reminder that life could persist even in the unlikeliest of places. She straightened up, feeling a new determination settle within her, a resolve to find a way forward, even if it meant letting go of the dreams she had once held so tightly. Emily returned to the porch, her steps lighter than they had been in weeks. She picked up the empty cup she had left behind and went inside, feeling the warmth of the house seep into her chilled skin. The heaviness was still there, a familiar companion, but now it felt different, less like a weight that held her down, and more like something she could learn to carry. She spent the rest of the day cleaning out the spare room, boxing up Daniel's things, and stacking them neatly in the hallway. She didn't know if she was ready to let go completely, but this small act of reclaiming the space felt like a first step, a way to start making the house her own again. As the afternoon light faded and the shadows grew long, she stood in the doorway of the room, looking out at the bare walls, the empty bed, and felt a sense of peace settle over her, fragile but real. When night fell, she went to bed with a sense of resolve that hadn't been there before. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't dream of the life she had lost. Instead, she dreamed of the little shoots in the garden, growing stronger with each passing day, reaching toward a sun that promised a new beginning. And in that quiet darkness, Emily allowed herself to believe that she, too, could find a way to grow beyond the shadows of yesterday. Chapter 6. A Glimpse of Tomorrow. The sun crept over the horizon, casting a golden glow through Emily's bedroom window, waking her gently from the depths of sleep. She lay still for a moment, letting the light wash over her, a warmth that touched her skin and seeped deeper into the spaces where the cold of grief had lingered. For the first time in a long while, there was a sense of calm in the morning, a subtle shift, like the first signs of spring after a long, bitter winter. She rose slowly, her limbs still heavy with the memories of the night before. As she walked through the hallway, she glanced at the boxes she had stacked against the wall. Daniel's belongings, packed away neatly but not yet moved. They were like shadows of a life she no longer recognized, and though they still held a weight in her heart, she felt a new distance from them, as if they were relics of a story that had run its course. After making herself breakfast, Emily carried her coffee out to the porch again, drawn to the sight of the frost-covered lawn, the air crisp with the promise of a clear day. She found herself looking toward the far end of the garden, where she had discovered the little shoots pushing through the cold earth. A small, hopeful smile tugged at the corners of her lips as she noticed the subtle changes. The shoots had grown taller, the green brighter against the silvered grass. She decided to spend the morning in the garden, a task that felt strangely necessary, as if tending to the overgrown beds could help her tend to the tangle of emotions inside her. She pulled on her boots and gloves, bundling herself against the chill, and set to work clearing away the dead leaves and broken branches that had accumulated over the winter. The rake scraped against the frozen ground, the rhythmic sound filling the quiet air, and with each stroke, she felt a little more of the tension in her shoulders ease. As she moved through the garden, she came across remnants of last year's blooms, dried stalks that crumbled beneath her touch, petals that had faded to pale, brittle husks. She remembered how she and Daniel had planted these flowers together, their hands dirty with soil, their laughter bright and unguarded. The memory felt distant now, like a photograph left too long in the sun, the edges blurred and softened by time. But instead of turning away from it, she let herself linger in that moment, letting the memory settle into the space between what was and what could be. By midday, she had cleared most of the beds, leaving behind neat rows of soil that seemed to breathe under the open sky. She stood back to survey her work, brushing a strand of hair from her face, her cheeks flushed with the cold. There was a satisfaction in the simple act of restoring order, of creating a space where new life could take root. It was a small victory, but one that felt meaningful in its own quiet way. After lunch, she found herself drawn to the shed once more, where the boxes of old memories waited. This time, she approached them with a different intent, not to dwell in the past, but to sort through the pieces of it, to decide what she wanted to keep and what she was ready to let go of. She opened the boxes one by one, pulling out photographs, trinkets, and old love letters, each one a thread in the tapestry of their life together. She came across a picture of their first home, a small apartment in the city, with peeling wallpaper and a leaky faucet that had driven them both mad. They had been so young then, so certain that they could make a life together despite the cracks in the walls and the noisy neighbors. She set the photo aside, smiling faintly at the memory, and continued to sift through the rest. Among the items, she found a small, polished stone, a keepsake from their trip to the coast, a time when they had been happier than she could remember now. It fit neatly in the palm of her hand, smooth and cool, and she ran her thumb over its surface, feeling the weight of it. For a moment, she considered keeping it, a reminder of the good times they had shared. But then she placed it back in the box, along with the letters and photos, sealing them away with a quiet sense of closure. By late afternoon, she had reduced the piles to a few small mementos, things that she felt held meaning beyond the hurt, pieces that spoke to the parts of her life she wasn't ready to let go of. The rest she tucked back into the boxes, resolving to donate or discard them when she was ready. It was a strange thing to sort through the remnants of a love that had once defined her world, but she felt lighter for it, as if she had begun to make space for something new. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the lawn, Emily took the remaining items and arranged them on the shelf in her living room. A framed photograph of her and Daniel from their first anniversary, a seashell they had collected together, a small figurine of a bird that he had once given her as a gift. It wasn't much, but it felt like a way to honor the parts of their story that she still cherished, even if the ending had come sooner than she had hoped. She stepped back to admire the shelf, feeling a quiet satisfaction settle over her. It was a reminder that she could hold on to the memories that mattered without letting them define her, that she could build a new life on the foundations of the old. And as she stood there, watching the last light fade from the room, she realized that she was ready to face the future, whatever it might hold. That evening, Emily returned to the garden, carrying a small packet of seeds she had found in the back of the shed, wildflowers that Daniel had bought but never planted. She knelt down beside the little shoots she had discovered, feeling the cold soil beneath her hands, and began to plant the seeds in neat rows around the budding green. She worked slowly, savoring the feel of the earth between her fingers, the way each seed promised a burst of color when spring finally arrived. When she finished, she stood up, brushing the dirt from her gloves, and looked out across the garden. It was still bare, the ground rough and uneven, but she could see the potential hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be revealed. And for the first time, she felt a sense of anticipation, a hope that had been buried beneath the weight of yesterday but now stirred with the promise of something new. As the stars began to appear in the sky above, Emily lingered outside, breathing in the crisp night air, feeling the cool wind brush against her skin. The house behind her was still and quiet, but it no longer felt like a place filled with loss. It felt like a place where she could begin again, where she could build something for herself, even if the path ahead was uncertain. She turned back toward the porch, glancing once more at the freshly planted seeds, and made her way inside. There was still so much she didn't know, so many unanswered questions about what the future would bring. But she no longer felt afraid of the uncertainty, no longer felt bound by the shadows of the past. Instead, she felt a quiet determination, a resolve to keep moving forward, one small step at a time. And as she drifted off to sleep that night, she dreamed not of the life she had lost, but of the garden in bloom, bright flowers stretching toward the sun, filling the air with their fragrance, each one a testament to the resilience that lay hidden within her heart. Chapter 7. The Unexpected Letter. Morning arrived with a thick layer of mist blanketing the fields, a gray softness that wrapped around Emily's cottage. She woke early, moving through the quiet rooms with the ease of a familiar routine. Yet today felt different. Like the air held a quiet anticipation, something unspoken lingering just beyond her reach. After making her coffee, she found herself lingering by the window, staring into the fog-draped garden, her thoughts drifting far beyond the edges of her view. As she gazed out into the murky morning, a sudden knock on the door broke the stillness. It startled her, a sound she wasn't expecting, one that resonated through the empty house with an unfamiliar urgency. She hesitated for a moment, the warmth of her coffee cup grounding her before she set it down and made her way to the door. Outside, the postman stood, bundled in his thick coat, holding a single envelope. He handed it to her with a polite nod before turning to leave, disappearing back into the mist as quickly as he had come. Emily glanced down at the envelope, her name written in a handwriting she recognized immediately, Daniel's. Her breath caught, the world around her narrowing to the rectangle of paper in her hands. It felt strange to hold something from him now, months after he had left, like a ghost of their former life slipping through the cracks. She traced the curve of the letters with her thumb, feeling a tangle of emotions rise up inside her. Curiosity, fear, resentment, and something else, something quieter that she couldn't quite name. She closed the door behind her, the chill of the morning following her inside, and made her way back to the kitchen table. Sitting down, she placed the envelope before her, its weight heavier than it should have been. For a long moment, she just stared at it, the silence of the house pressing in around her, as if the walls were holding their breath along with her. Finally, she reached for a letter opener, slicing through the edge of the envelope with careful precision. She pulled out the folded sheet inside, her hands trembling slightly as she unfolded it, revealing the neat, sloping lines of Daniel's handwriting. She hadn't seen his words in so long, hadn't heard his voice since that night when he'd walked out of their lives. The letter was brief, written with the same careful eloquence that Daniel had always used, but the weight of its contents hit her like a cold wind. He spoke of regret, of the mistakes he had made, and the life he had left behind. There was an apology woven between the lines, an acknowledgement of the pain he had caused her, but there was no request for forgiveness, no plea for reconciliation. Instead, it was an update on the life he had built since their separation, a life that sounded distant, even as he tried to bridge the gap between them with his words. Emily read it once, then again, each time feeling the words settle differently in her chest. There was a finality to it, a sense that he had moved on and wanted her to know that he wished her the same. It was not the closure she had imagined, not the answers to the questions that had kept her awake on countless nights, but it was something, a small, imperfect piece of the puzzle that she could now lay down. She folded the letter carefully, placing it back inside the envelope before setting it on the table beside her coffee. Outside, the mist was beginning to lift, revealing patches of blue sky, and she found herself watching the way the light slowly reclaimed the garden, how the shadows retreated beneath the warmth of the sun. Emily spent the next few hours in a strange, contemplative state, her mind drifting through memories and emotions like leaves caught in a gentle current. She thought of Daniel, of the man he had been when they first met, full of passion and dreams, of the man he had become, distant and detached. She thought of the years they had spent building a life together, the good moments and the struggles that had defined them, and she thought of how quickly it had all unraveled, leaving her to piece together a new version of herself. Yet, as the day wore on, she realized that something within her had shifted. The letter, though unexpected, had brought with it a strange kind of peace, a sense that the chapter they had shared was truly closed. The hurt was still there, like a scar that hadn't fully faded, but it no longer felt like an open wound. It was simply a part of her story, one that she could acknowledge without letting it define the rest of her days. By the time the sun reached its peak, Emily found herself drawn back to the garden. She brought with her a small notebook she hadn't touched in months, one where she had once jotted down ideas for the future, plans and aspirations that had long since gathered dust. She sat on the porch steps, flipping through the pages filled with lists and sketches, the hopes she had once shared with Daniel and the dreams she had been too afraid to pursue on her own. She tore out the pages that no longer felt relevant, letting them flutter into the breeze like autumn leaves. The empty spaces left behind felt like a promise, room to write something new, something that belonged only to her. She began to fill them with fresh thoughts, small aspirations that were not tied to anyone else's expectations. Ideas for the garden she wanted to expand, a list of places she might travel to someday, new skills she wanted to learn. Each word she wrote felt like a declaration, a step forward into a future she was only beginning to imagine. As the afternoon waned, Emily gathered the torn pages from the ground, crumpling them into a ball before tossing them into the fireplace. The flames leapt up eagerly, devouring the past, and she watched as the edges of the paper curled and blackened, the old plans turning to ash. There was a strange satisfaction in the sight, a quiet acknowledgement that while she couldn't change what had happened, she could decide how to move beyond it. When night fell, Emily took the letter from Daniel and placed it in a small wooden box on her nightstand, a safe place where she could keep it without letting it linger in the open air. It felt right to hold on to it, not as a tether to the past, but as a reminder of where she had come from and how far she had already traveled. It was a part of her story, but it was not the ending. She lay down in bed that night, her body sinking into the cool sheets, her mind calm for the first time in what felt like ages. The house around her was silent, but the quiet no longer felt empty. It felt like the space between breaths, the moment before a new beginning. And as she closed her eyes, she thought not of Daniel's absence, but of the possibilities that lay beyond the shadows, of the seeds she had planted, the dreams she was beginning to nurture once more. Emily drifted into sleep with a sense of hope nestled in her chest, a belief that perhaps, after all she had lost, there was still something beautiful waiting for her in the days ahead. The letter had been a reminder of what was gone, but it had also given her a glimpse of tomorrow, a future that was hers to shape, one she was finally ready to embrace. Chapter 8. The Awakening of Self. The first warmth of spring touched the air, and with it came a slow awakening inside Emily, mirroring the change in the world around her. She rose early each morning, drawn by the sunlight that now spilled through her bedroom window, a golden invitation to step outside, to leave behind the heaviness of the past winter. She had never been one to savor mornings before, but now, each dawn felt like a new beginning, a promise wrapped in the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant chorus of birds. She spent her days immersed in the garden, coaxing life from the soil with her hands, transforming the patch of earth into something vibrant and green. The seeds she had planted weeks ago had started to sprout, delicate shoots that poked through the soil, unfurling leaves toward the sun. Emily knelt beside them, her fingers carefully loosening the soil around each fragile stem, marveling at their resilience. It struck her that, in some ways, she was like these young plants, tentative, but eager to reach for the light, despite the shadows that had lingered for so long. Her routine expanded beyond the garden. She found herself drawn to the woods that bordered her property, a place she had often overlooked in the busyness of her old life. Now, she wandered among the trees, following trails that twisted through the underbrush, letting the scent of pine and damp earth fill her lungs. The forest was a world of quiet, secret rhythms. The steady hum of insects, the flutter of wings as a bird darted between branches, the crunch of leaves underfoot. One afternoon, she came across a stream she hadn't known was there, hidden between the folds of the land. The water flowed clear and cool over smooth stones, its gentle murmur weaving through the stillness. She sat beside it, dipping her fingers into the icy flow, feeling a strange sense of connection to the endless motion of the current. It reminded her that life moved forward, always, changing, adapting, finding new paths when old ones closed off. Emily returned to the stream often in the days that followed, carrying a small sketchbook she had found buried in one of the boxes in her attic. She hadn't drawn in years, not since she was a young woman, when she had dreamed of becoming an artist before life had carried her in a different direction. But now, with the quiet companionship of the woods around her, she felt the urge to create again, to capture the shapes and shadows of the world she was rediscovering. She spent hours sketching the landscape, letting the lines flow across the page, unhurried and imperfect. At first, her hands felt clumsy, the drawings awkward and stiff. But she persisted, letting go of the need for perfection, allowing herself to enjoy the process rather than the outcome. Gradually, the sketches became more fluid, more reflective of the life she observed around her. The arc of a branch, the curve of a wildflower's petal, the play of light on the surface of the stream. She found a quiet joy in these moments, a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with anyone else's expectations. It was a small, personal rebellion against the version of herself she had once believed she had to be: the wife, the caretaker, the person who always put others before her own dreams. Here, among the trees, she was simply Emily, rediscovering the parts of herself she had left behind. Back at the cottage, the days grew longer, and Emily began to make small changes to her home, alterations that reflected the shift inside her. She rearranged the furniture in the living room, moving the armchair closer to the window so she could read in the afternoon light. She cleared out the last of the boxes in the attic, donating what she didn't need, creating a space where she could set up her sketches and tools, a place just for her. One rainy afternoon, she tackled the project of repainting her bedroom, covering the faded blue walls with a warm shade of cream. As she worked, the scent of fresh paint filled the air, mingling with the rain that drummed softly against the windows. Each brushstroke felt like a small act of reclamation, a way of turning the space into something new, something that belonged to her alone. In the evenings, she took to sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sky shift from gold to pink to deep indigo as the sun sank below the horizon. The quiet hours after sunset had always been the loneliest, but now they felt different, no longer haunted by the echo of what had been. Instead, they held a sense of possibility, a reminder that the solitude she once feared was becoming a place of comfort, a space where she could hear her own thoughts clearly. As the days turned into weeks, Emily began to notice subtle changes in herself. Her reflection in the mirror looked more familiar, her eyes less shadowed, her posture more relaxed, as if a weight she had carried for too long had begun to lift. She felt lighter on her morning walks, her footsteps quickening as she explored new paths through the woods, discovering hidden clearings where wildflowers bloomed in bright patches of color. She also began to venture beyond her own property, exploring the town she had once only passed through in hurried errands. She found herself visiting the local farmers market, buying fresh produce and exchanging shy smiles with the vendors. She wandered through the small bookstore on the corner, losing herself in the aisles of secondhand novels, picking up stories she had never made time for before. One day, while browsing through a collection of old poetry books, she came across a volume that caught her eye. Its cover worn and weathered, the title faded with age. She brought it home, reading a few pages each night before bed, letting the rhythm of the verses wash over her like the sound of the stream. The poems spoke of love and loss, of nature's cycles, of finding beauty in the ordinary, and they seemed to mirror her own journey, reflecting the quiet transformations she was undergoing. Spring deepened into early summer, and the garden flourished under Emily's care. The wildflowers she had planted burst into bloom, filling the air with their sweet fragrance, drawing bees and butterflies that flitted through the yard like living jewels. The small plot of vegetables she had sown began to yield its first fruits: tomatoes, cucumbers, and tender greens that she harvested with a sense of pride, knowing they had come from her own hands. On warm evenings, she would bring a blanket out to the garden, lying back beneath the open sky, watching the stars emerge one by one. The vastness of the universe felt less intimidating now, more like a reminder of how small her troubles were in the grand scheme of things. She found herself thinking about the future, not with dread or uncertainty, but with a growing sense of curiosity, wondering what paths might open up to her if she continued to follow this newfound sense of self. The letter from Daniel remained in its box on her nightstand, but it no longer occupied the forefront of her thoughts. She had made peace with it, with the knowledge that their story had come to an end, and she had allowed herself to start writing a new one. She still thought of him sometimes, but the memories were softer, no longer edged with pain. Instead, they had become part of the tapestry of her life, woven into the background as she focused on the patterns she was creating for herself. Emily's days continued to unfold in this gentle rhythm, each one bringing small moments of discovery, of reconnection with the world around her and with herself. She began to dream again, not just at night, but during those quiet hours when she sat by the stream or sketched the trees, imagining the possibilities that lay ahead. She no longer felt like a woman defined by what she had lost, but like someone who was learning to embrace the freedom that came with starting over. And as summer's warmth deepened, Emily realized that she had found something precious in the midst of her solitude, a sense of self that had been hidden beneath layers of duty and expectation, buried by the weight of a broken heart. She had uncovered it slowly, like a seedling emerging from the dark earth, reaching toward the light. And now, as she stood in the garden, surrounded by the life she had nurtured, she knew that she was ready for whatever came next, unafraid of the unknown that lay beyond the horizon. Chapter 9. A Glimmer of Hope. The heat of summer had settled over the town, turning the air warm and thick with humidity. The days stretched out lazily, the sun lingering in the sky until late evening, casting long shadows across the fields and woods. Emily had grown accustomed to this quiet rhythm of life, finding solace in the predictability of each day. The early morning walks, the afternoons in her garden, the evenings spent under the stars. Yet, as the season wore on, there was a restlessness in her, a faint whisper that something new was waiting just beyond her familiar paths. One Sunday morning, she decided to drive beyond the boundaries of her little town, taking a narrow country road that twisted through hills and meadows. The windows of her car were rolled down, the wind ruffling her hair as she let the road guide her. She passed fields of wildflowers, clusters of oak trees, and the occasional farmhouse, their porches shaded by old, sprawling maples. The drive felt like a small adventure, a break from the routine she had carved out for herself, a chance to explore. Eventually, she found herself at a small, secluded lake she had never seen before. It was nestled in a hollow, surrounded by trees that leaned close to the water's edge, their branches dipping into the glassy surface. The place had an untouched quality to it, as if it had remained unchanged for years, hidden away from the world. She parked her car on the side of the road, walking down a path lined with reeds and cattails until she reached a small, sandy clearing by the shore. Emily settled on a weathered log that lay half buried in the sand, slipping off her shoes and letting her feet sink into the cool, damp ground. The lake stretched out before her, its waters calm and clear, reflecting the sky like a mirror. She closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of pine and water, listening to the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. For a long time, she sat there, content in the stillness, feeling a sense of peace seep into her bones. But as she looked out over the lake, she noticed movement on the far side of the water. A figure walking along the shore, barely visible through the screen of trees. Her curiosity piqued. She watched as the figure drew closer, the outline becoming clearer against the backdrop of green and blue. It was a man, tall and lean, with tousled hair that caught the light. He carried a fishing rod slung over one shoulder, a tackle box in the other hand, moving with an easy, unhurried stride. Emily felt a flicker of surprise. She had thought this place was her discovery, a hidden spot that no one else knew about. But as the man continued along the water's edge, he seemed just as at home here as she did, as if he, too, had been drawn to this quiet place. She turned her attention back to the lake, not wanting to intrude on his solitude, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. The man reached the opposite shore, setting down his tackle box near a cluster of rocks. He cast his line into the water, settling onto a boulder with a patience that suggested he had done this many times before. Emily watched from a distance, the two of them separated by the wide expanse of the lake. She wondered about him, who he was, what brought him to this place. It was strange, this silent companionship across the water, like two sides of a mirror, each reflecting a solitary moment in time. She stayed by the lake for a while longer, letting the sun warm her skin, her thoughts drifting like the clouds overhead. The presence of the stranger on the far shore felt oddly comforting, a reminder that she wasn't as alone in the world as she sometimes felt. When she finally rose to leave, brushing the sand from her feet, she cast a final glance across the lake. The man was still there, his focus on the water, the arc of his fishing line glinting in the sunlight. Emily returned to the lake several times in the days that followed, drawn back by the tranquility of the place, by the way the light played on the water's surface, shifting with the hours. Each time, she found the man already there, always in the same spot, his figure a familiar silhouette against the backdrop of trees. He seemed to follow a routine as steady as her own, arriving with the dawn, casting his line into the water, spending hours in stillness before disappearing into the woods again. She wondered about him during her walks through the woods and while tending to her garden. He had become a part of the landscape in her mind, a mystery that lingered at the edges of her thoughts. Yet she never crossed to the other side of the lake, content to observe from a distance, weaving stories about him in her imagination. Perhaps he was a writer seeking inspiration, or a traveler taking refuge from the rush of the city. One afternoon, as Emily sat sketching the lake from her usual spot, she noticed something unexpected, a small, weathered canoe drifting toward her shore. It moved gently with the current, its wooden sides worn and sun-bleached. She glanced up, searching the far shore for the man, but he was not there. Instead, the canoe drifted closer, carried by the lazy pull of the water until it came to rest against the sand at her feet. Curiosity nudged her, and she approached the canoe, running her fingers along its rough edges. It was simple, handmade, with the faint scent of pine clinging to the wood. Tucked beneath the bench at the stern, she found a folded piece of paper, damp and smudged at the edges. She hesitated for a moment before opening it, revealing a sketch, her sketch, of the lake as seen from her spot on the shore. The lines were precise, capturing the curve of the water, the sweep of trees, the play of light on the ripples. Emily stared at the drawing, feeling a strange mix of emotions wash over her. Surprise, confusion, a faint warmth that crept into her chest. She glanced back across the lake, half expecting to see the man emerge from the woods, but the far shore remained empty. She folded the sketch carefully, tucking it into her pocket, and pushed the canoe back into the water, watching as it drifted slowly away. In the days that followed, she found herself thinking of the sketch often, turning the paper over in her hands late at night, tracing the lines with her fingertips. It felt like a message, a quiet acknowledgement of their shared presence by the lake, a wordless connection that stretched across the water. She wondered if the man had watched her sketching, if he had felt the same sense of curiosity, the same pull toward this place. Emily began to look forward to her visits to the lake with a new sense of anticipation, wondering if she might catch another glimpse of him, if there might be more unexpected gestures hidden among the reeds and rocks. She found herself leaving small offerings of her own, a cluster of wildflowers tucked into the crevice of a stone, a smooth pebble placed where the canoe had come ashore. Each time, she wondered if he would notice, if he might leave some small sign in return. Summer stretched on, the days long and golden, each one filled with the promise of discovery. The lake had become a place of quiet mystery, a space where Emily felt herself opening up to the possibility of connection, of something new taking root in the quiet spaces of her heart. She still carried the scars of betrayal, the memories of what she had lost, but they no longer defined her. Here, by the water's edge, she felt herself growing, unfurling like the wildflowers that bloomed beneath the sun. And though she still did not know the man's name, nor the stories that might lie behind his quiet presence, she felt a growing sense of kinship with him, as if they were two wanderers who had found a place of refuge in the same forgotten corner of the world. It was a connection unspoken, a thread woven through the stillness of the lake, binding them together in ways that words could never fully capture. And as she sat by the water, sketching the ever-changing reflections on its surface, Emily felt a quiet hope begin to bloom within her. A hope that perhaps, in this hidden place, she might find the courage to embrace whatever came next. Chapter 10. A shift in the air. The leaves had begun to turn, their edges tinged with shades of gold and crimson as summer slipped into the cool embrace of autumn. The air grew crisper each morning, carrying the scent of pine and decaying leaves, and the sky seemed a deeper blue against the changing landscape. Emily's visits to the lake continued, now accompanied by the crunch of fallen leaves beneath her boots. The lake itself seemed to change with the season, its waters darkening to a deeper shade, reflecting the red and orange canopy that framed its edges. The man was there as always, his figure a familiar presence on the opposite shore. He still arrived with the first light of day, casting his line into the cold water, his movements slow and deliberate. But something was different now, a subtle shift that Emily couldn't quite name. It was in the way he lingered longer before disappearing into the woods, how his gaze seemed to find her more often across the water's expanse. She felt it too, an unspoken invitation, a sense that the distance between them was growing smaller with each passing day. On one particularly crisp morning, Emily arrived at the lake to find a small stack of flat stones arranged on the boulder where she often sat. The stones were smooth and round, each one carefully balanced atop the other, forming a simple tower that seemed impossibly delicate. She smiled at the sight, recognizing it as a gesture, a quiet acknowledgement of her presence. She wondered if he had noticed the little offerings she'd left behind, the wildflowers, the polished pebble, the way she had traced shapes in the sand with her fingertips. Emily took the stones in her hands, feeling their weight, the coolness of their surfaces. She rearranged them into a new pattern, weaving her appreciation into the placement of each one. Before setting them back on the boulder, she left a small sprig of lavender alongside them, freshly picked from her garden, its purple blossoms standing out against the gray stones. The air was still as she stepped back, watching her creation settle into the scene, wondering if he would find it later, if he would understand. Days passed, and each time she visited the lake, the little stone arrangements changed, their shapes evolving in new ways. It became a quiet game between them, a way of communicating without words, of bridging the distance that remained. Emily found herself thinking about the man more often, imagining the calluses on his hands from holding the fishing rod, the sound of his footsteps on the forest path. She wondered what his voice might sound like, what kind of life he lived beyond the boundaries of the lake. One evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the lake to molten gold, Emily stood by the shore, watching the sky fade into a wash of violet and pink. She wrapped her arms around herself against the evening chill, feeling the first hint of frost in the air. As she turned to leave, her eyes caught movement on the far side of the water, a flash of white against the darkening woods. She paused, peering through the growing shadows until she saw it clearly. A small, folded piece of paper tucked between two rocks on the opposite shore, just where he often sat. Her heart quickened at the sight. She hesitated, torn between curiosity and the quiet rhythm they had established, the unspoken rules of their strange connection. But the pull of the unknown was too strong, and she found herself walking along the edge of the lake, her footsteps quickening as she drew closer to the spot. The air was cold against her face, carrying the rustle of leaves and the distant calls of birds settling in for the night. When she reached the far side of the lake, she paused for a moment, feeling a sense of trespass as she knelt beside the rocks. The paper was weathered, its edges curling, but the inked lines inside were clear. Another sketch, but this time of her, sitting by the water's edge with her hair caught in the wind. The strokes were precise, capturing the curve of her profile, the way her hands rested on her knees. It was a simple drawing, but there was a tenderness in the lines, a care that spoke of long hours spent observing from afar. Emily held the sketch in her hands, a strange mix of emotions welling up inside her. She felt exposed, as if the man had seen through the walls she had built around herself, catching glimpses of the vulnerability she thought she had hidden so well. Yet there was a warmth too, a sense of being seen, of being understood in a way that went beyond words. She folded the paper carefully, slipping it into her pocket, and turned back toward her side of the lake, her thoughts swirling like the wind through the autumn leaves. That night, she sat by the fire in her small cottage, turning the sketch over in her hands, tracing the lines with her fingertips. The drawing felt like a promise, a hint of something deeper beneath the surface of their silent exchanges. She wondered what might come next, whether he would reveal more of himself, or if their connection would remain caught in the delicate balance they had created. She found herself hoping for more, imagining the possibility of meeting him face to face, of breaking the silence that stretched between them. As the days grew shorter and the chill deepened, Emily began leaving her own sketches by the lake, drawings of the changing landscape, of the way the morning mist clung to the water, of the shadows that played across the rocks at sunset. Each time, she wondered if he would find them, if he would understand the meaning behind the images she left behind. She imagined him unfolding the papers, his fingers brushing the marks she had made, the quiet smile that might touch his lips. Autumn wrapped the lake in a new kind of beauty, the trees blazing with color before shedding their leaves in great golden drifts. The water grew colder, a thin layer of frost forming along the shore each morning, and the air filled with the scent of smoke from distant wood fires. Yet even as the world around them changed, the connection between Emily and the stranger held, as steady and enduring as the stones they rearranged by the water. One afternoon, Emily found a new addition to the rock formations, a smooth, flat stone with a small heart carved into its surface, left in the spot where she had placed her last sketch. She picked it up, feeling the grooves beneath her fingertips, her breath catching at the simple gesture. It felt like an acknowledgement, a step forward in their unspoken dance, a way of saying that he had seen her offerings and returned them with something of his own. She placed the stone in her pocket, carrying it with her as she walked back through the woods, her mind filled with possibilities. The forest was quiet, the trees whispering secrets she could almost understand, and as she made her way back to the cottage, she felt the weight of something shifting inside her. There was a new lightness in her step, a sense that perhaps, amidst the changing seasons, she was finding her way back to herself. That night, as she lay in bed with the stone resting on her nightstand, she let her thoughts drift to the man on the far shore, to the hidden layers of his life that she had yet to uncover. She wondered if he was thinking of her too, if he felt the same quiet thrill at the small signs they left for each other. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Emily felt a sense of anticipation blooming within her, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was something waiting for her beyond the still waters of the lake, something she had not dared to hope for before. And as the stars wheeled overhead, casting their ancient light across the sleeping earth, she let herself dream of what might come next, her heart open to the quiet, unexpected shift in the air. Chapter 11. A Door Left Ajar. The chill of late autumn settled deeply over the lakeside, turning the mornings crisp with frost and the afternoons bathed in the low, pale light of the sun. The forest, now almost bare, stood as a network of skeletal branches, their leaves strewn across the earth in a patchwork of gold and brown. The air carried the dry, smoky scent of wood fires from distant chimneys, a reminder that winter was drawing closer with every passing day. Emily's cottage had taken on a new rhythm, her days filled with small rituals that marked the season's shift, stacking firewood, layering woolen blankets over the chairs, and brewing spiced tea that steamed up the windows as she watched the sun dip lower each evening. Yet amidst the routines, there was a tension that threaded through her days, an anticipation that came from the unspoken bond she had formed with the man across the lake. The lake, too, had changed. Its waters, once sparkling under the summer sun, now mirrored the gray skies, rippling with the cold winds that swept down from the north. Emily continued her walks to the shore, feeling the bite of the wind against her cheeks, but she noticed the change in the man's visits as well. He appeared less frequently, his figure now only a silhouette against the barren woods, and when he did come, he stayed for shorter spans of time, his movements shadowed by an unnameable heaviness. On one particularly frigid afternoon, Emily arrived at the lake to find a new surprise waiting for her. A small, weathered box rested atop the familiar boulder, tied with a thin, faded ribbon that fluttered in the wind. She hesitated before picking it up, her fingers numb from the cold as she untied the ribbon and opened the lid. Inside, nestled in a bed of dried pine needles, lay an old-fashioned brass key, its surface tarnished with age. Next to it, a small sketch of the cottage, her cottage, rendered in the same precise lines that had captured her likeness before. Emily's breath caught as she ran her thumb over the key's intricate design. The sight of her cottage drawn with such care, with the ivy trailing up its sides and the wildflowers that had once grown around its porch, filled her with a sense of wonder. The key itself, though, left her puzzled. It wasn't a match for any lock she recognized. It was smaller, more delicate, like something meant for a hidden drawer or a forgotten chest. She turned it over in her hands, letting the mystery of it settle in her mind, and placed it carefully back in the box. She left the boulder, walking back to her cottage with the box tucked against her chest, its weight both comforting and strange. As she crossed the threshold into the warmth of her home, she glanced around, scanning the familiar corners and shelves, wondering if there was a hidden door or a secret compartment that the key might unlock. She spent the rest of the afternoon searching, her fingers tracing the edges of old cupboards, lifting rugs to check for trapdoors, and inspecting the backs of dusty shelves. Her efforts, however, yielded nothing. The key remained a puzzle, its purpose elusive, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that it held some deeper meaning, that the man had left it for her as more than just a trinket. She placed the box on her mantel, next to the stone with the carved heart, and sat by the fire, staring into the flickering flames as the shadows danced across the walls. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the bare branches like bony fingers tapping against the glass. Days passed, and the cold deepened. The frost that covered the lake in the mornings now lingered well into the afternoons, and the sky took on a heavy, leaden hue. Emily found herself thinking more and more about the man's gift, about the key that seemed to carry a message she couldn't decipher. She wondered if he intended to leave something behind, if the key was a symbol of an ending or the promise of a new beginning. She found herself missing his steady presence across the water, the way their silent exchanges had woven a thread of connection through the solitude of the months. Then, one evening, as the first snowflakes began to drift down from the sky, she noticed something she had not seen before. There, beneath the ivy that clung to the north side of her cottage, a small, weathered door stood partly obscured by the creeping vines. It was low and narrow, almost hidden among the shadows, its wooden surface scarred by time and the elements. Emily had lived in the cottage for nearly a decade, but she had never seen this door before. It seemed to blend seamlessly into the stonework, as if it had been waiting for her to discover it. She knelt in the snow, her breath fogging the air as she brushed away the ivy, revealing a small, ancient lock set into the door's frame. Her heart thudded in her chest as she retrieved the brass key from the mantel, its weight cold in her palm. She held it up to the lock, the two pieces fitting together as if they were made for each other, and turned the key slowly, feeling the mechanism catch and give way with a soft click. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow space beyond, dark and musty, the air thick with the scent of old wood and earth. Emily hesitated before stepping inside, her footsteps muffled on the dirt floor as she explored the hidden room. It was small, almost a closet, with rough-hewn walls and a single window that looked out toward the lake, covered with a thick layer of grime. But what caught her attention was the bundle of letters stacked neatly on a low shelf, their edges yellowed with age, tied together with a faded piece of twine. Emily picked them up, her hands trembling as she unwrapped the twine and fanned through the envelopes. They were addressed to her, each one bearing her name in an unfamiliar hand, the ink smudged by time. She took the letters back to the warmth of her cottage, lighting a lantern as the snow fell outside, turning the world into a quiet, white expanse. She sat by the fire and began to read, each letter unfolding a story she had never known, a tale of loss and longing, of a life lived in the shadows. The words spoke of moments glimpsed through windows, of the sound of laughter carried on the wind, of a quiet presence that had watched over her from a distance. As she read, the pieces began to fall into place. The man, whose name she still did not know, had lived by the lake long before she arrived, and he had seen her come and go, year after year, his own life tangled with the rhythms of the water and the woods. The letters spoke of his regret, of a love that had gone unspoken, of the many times he had meant to cross the distance between them but had remained rooted to his side of the lake, too bound by his own past to reach out. Emily read until the fire burned low, until the lantern's light flickered and waned. She held the last letter in her hands, her eyes lingering on the closing lines, words that hinted at a farewell, at a departure he had been planning for some time. The realization left her breathless, a weight settling over her chest as she wondered if she had already missed her chance, if the key and the letters were his way of saying goodbye. She rose early the next morning, determined to find him, to cross the lake as she had never done before. The snow lay thick on the ground, muffling her steps as she made her way through the woods, down the path that led to the far shore. The air was sharp with cold, each breath a plume of white, and her heart pounded in time with her hurried pace. When she reached the opposite side of the lake, the clearing where he had always fished was empty, the ground covered in a fresh blanket of snow. The only sign of his presence was a small, makeshift shelter tucked beneath the trees, its roof sagging under the weight of the snow. Emily stood in the clearing, turning in circles as her breath came in ragged gasps, the sense of his absence pressing down on her like the winter sky. But as she turned to leave, she caught sight of something glinting near the edge of the frozen lake, a small, silver pendant, half buried in the snow. She knelt to pick it up, brushing the snow from its surface, and saw the initials engraved on its back. His initials, entwined with a symbol she recognized from one of the sketches he had left behind. Emily clutched the pendant in her hand, feeling its cold weight against her skin, and for the first time, she allowed herself to hope that their story might not be over. She turned back toward her side of the lake, her thoughts filled with the letters she had read, with the hidden room and the key that had unlocked it. She knew that there were still questions left unanswered, still shadows that lingered between them, but she was ready now to search for those answers, to find the man who had left such a quiet mark on her life. And as she walked back through the snow-covered woods, the sun rising behind her, she felt a shift in the air, a sense that the future, once so uncertain, was now a door left ajar, waiting for her to step through. Chapter 12. A Stranger's Kindness. The first snowstorm of the season blanketed the world in white, turning the lake into a frozen expanse that gleamed under the pale winter sun. Emily woke to find her cottage surrounded by a sea of snowdrifts, the windows rimed with frost, and the trees bending under their icy coats. The quiet of the morning settled into her bones, a hush that seemed to echo the questions she still carried. Questions about the letters, about the man she had come to know without truly knowing him. The pendant she had found remained with her, resting on the table beside her bed, a small symbol of the life she had glimpsed through his words. Its silver surface, though worn, held a warmth against her palm whenever she picked it up, and she found herself tracing the initials over and over, trying to imagine the moments that had shaped their meaning. She wondered what it might have been like for him, living all those years in the shadow of the lake, watching the seasons change from his solitary perch, yet never stepping fully into the light of another's presence. With the snow sealing her in, Emily used the days to tend to the small chores that winter brought, shoveling paths through the drifts, mending the leaks in her roof, and chopping wood for the fire that now burned steadily throughout the day and night. The routine kept her hands busy, but her thoughts lingered on the hidden room she had uncovered, on the narrow door she had opened with the brass key. It was as if that act had unlocked something inside her as well, a door that she had kept closed against the pain of her past and the uncertainty of the future. She often returned to the letters, reading through them in the flickering light of the fire. Each page revealed a little more about the man who had lived so close and yet seemed to dwell in a world apart. His words spoke of a deep yearning, of a sense of loss that had settled into his life long before she had come to the lake. They hinted at a family he had left behind, at a love that had ended abruptly, leaving him with a wound that had never quite healed. Emily felt a strange kinship with him through those letters, a sense that their loneliness had woven a thread between them long before they had ever exchanged those silent glances across the water. She understood the ache of loss, the way it could shape a life, could twist time into a loop that kept bringing the past back into the present. She, too, had lived in the shadow of a broken heart, but now, with the letters in her hands and the pendant on her table, she began to see a way out of that shadow, a path that led towards something new. The days passed slowly, the snow piling higher against her windows, the lake now a smooth sheet of ice that stretched all the way to the far shore. The man's cabin, visible from her upper window, remained dark, its chimney silent. The sense of his absence weighed heavily on her, filling her with a restless energy that drove her to lace up her boots and venture out into the winter landscape. She made her way across the frozen lake, her steps careful on the ice, her breath puffing in clouds that hung in the frigid air. The snow crunched beneath her feet as she reached the woods on the far side, where the trees stood like blackened spires against the whiteness. She moved through the underbrush, following the faint trails that she had seen him take, her heart beating faster as she approached his cabin, hoping for a sign that he might still be near. The cabin stood silent among the trees, its windows shuttered against the cold, the roof sagging under the weight of snow. Emily circled the structure, brushing snow from the small porch where a pile of wood had been stacked neatly against the wall. She hesitated before knocking on the doorframe, her hand hovering over the rough wood, but she knew that it would not open for her. Not now, when his absence was so palpable, the air thick with the weight of things left unsaid. Instead, she left a small bundle by the door. One of her own letters, folded neatly inside a waterproof pouch, the pendant tucked inside as a token. She hoped that, wherever he was, he might find it, might understand the message she could not speak aloud. The snow began to fall again as she turned to leave, large flakes that melted against her cheeks, and she felt a pang of uncertainty, wondering if her gesture would be enough, if he would understand what she had tried to convey. Emily returned to her cottage, the storm intensifying behind her, the wind whipping through the trees with a low, mournful sound. She watched from her window as the snow piled up against the woods, covering her tracks, erasing the path she had taken to the man's cabin. The letters remained on her table, a testament to the connection they had shared, to the possibility that still lingered between them. Winter settled into a steady rhythm, the days growing shorter and the nights stretching long and cold. Emily spent her time tending to her garden, preparing for the seeds she would plant when spring finally returned. She imagined the man out there somewhere, moving through his own routines, carrying the memory of their silent exchanges like a hidden ember. She hoped that, like her, he might find warmth in the thought of a future that was no longer bound by the past. Then, one morning, she woke to find a new set of tracks leading to her door, imprinted in the fresh snow. Her heart leapt as she pushed open the door, stepping out into the crisp air, and found a small, hand-carved box resting on the doorstep. She knelt to pick it up, her fingers trembling as she lifted the lid to reveal a new sketch. This time of the two cottages, side by side, with a thin, arched bridge connecting them across the frozen lake. Beneath the sketch, a bundle of dried wildflowers lay pressed between the pages, their colors faded but still vivid against the white paper. Emily's breath caught as she realized what the flowers meant, as she saw in them a promise, a gesture that spoke of a willingness to bridge the distance that had always separated them. She took the box inside, placing it next to the letters on her table, her mind whirling with the possibilities that had begun to unfurl. The image of the bridge stayed with her, filling her thoughts as she moved through the tasks of the day, and she found herself imagining the thaw of spring, the ice melting on the lake, the waters flowing freely once more. The winter dragged on, but Emily carried a new sense of hope within her, a sense that the loneliness she had known for so long was beginning to lift. She continued her visits to the lake, watching as the ice thickened and then began to crack, the sound like distant thunder rolling across the frozen expanse. The snow on the trees grew heavy, bending their branches low, but beneath the surface, she could feel the promise of new growth, the first stirrings of life that would soon push up through the frozen earth. As the weeks passed, she found herself looking forward to each new day, to the slow, steady return of the sun, to the way the light began to linger a little longer on the horizon. She thought often of the bridge the man had drawn, of the connection they might build between their lives, one step at a time. And though the uncertainty remained, though the future stretched before her like a landscape hidden in fog, she felt ready to face it, to meet whatever lay beyond with an open heart. Spring would come, and with it, the chance to build something new, a bridge between past and present, between two souls who had once known only silence. And as she placed the box and the letters carefully on her windowsill, Emily allowed herself to hope that, when the thaw finally arrived, they might cross that bridge together, into a future where the threads of their stories might finally weave into one. Chapter 13. The Promise of Spring. With the arrival of spring, the world transformed under a brilliant sun. The snow melted into rivulets, trickling down the sides of the lake and pooling in small puddles that sparkled like diamonds in the light. Emily watched as the landscape around her awakened from its slumber, the trees bursting with tender green buds and the air filled with the scent of earth coming back to life. Each day brought new blooms, and with them, a renewed sense of hope. She spent hours tending to her garden, loosening the soil, and carefully planting the seeds she had chosen in anticipation of this season. The small plot behind her cottage, once blanketed in white, now bloomed with promise. She sowed tomatoes, peppers, and fragrant herbs, envisioning the meal she would create from her harvest. With each seed she buried, Emily whispered silent prayers for growth, for connection, and for the man whose presence had become an essential part of her thoughts. As the days passed, She continued to find inspiration in the small box he had left at her door. The sketch of their cottages, now framed on her mantel, served as a daily reminder of the bridge they had begun to construct between their lives. Though they had yet to speak, the silence felt rich with unexpressed understanding, a deepening bond that transcended words. Each morning, she would place fresh wildflowers beside the sketch, their vibrant colors celebrating the arrival of spring and the beauty of the life that surrounded her. One afternoon, as Emily prepared to venture out to the lake, she caught a glimpse of movement from her window. Her heart quickened as she saw him, Nathan, standing on the edge of his porch, a canvas in one hand and a palette in the other. She watched as he set up his easel, his gaze directed at the lake, where the shimmering water danced in the sunlight. The sight of him stirred something deep within her, a rush of emotions that she had long suppressed. Taking a deep breath, she made her way outside, her footsteps soft against the damp earth. The path to his cabin felt both familiar and strange, her heart pounding in anticipation. As she approached, she noted the changes that spring had wrought in the landscape. The flowers blooming in wild patches, the soft rustle of leaves stirring in the breeze, and the vibrant sounds of life returning to the woods. Nathan was absorbed in his work, his brow furrowed in concentration as he mixed colors on his palette, the brush poised over the canvas. She paused at the edge of the clearing, feeling both excitement and apprehension. He had brought beauty to this place, and yet there was a distance between them, one that felt daunting and vast. After a moment of hesitation, she stepped into view, the sunlight framing her silhouette. Nathan looked up, and for a heartbeat, their eyes locked. The connection sparked between them, electric and undeniable. His gaze traveled from her face to the flowers she held, a small bouquet of wild violets and dandelions, hand-picked from her garden. Though she did not speak, the gesture held a weight of significance, an offering that transcended words. She stepped closer, kneeling beside the easel, where the colors swirled on the canvas, capturing the essence of the lake, the trees, and the sky. The beauty of his creation took her breath away, and she realized how deeply he understood the landscape, how his art conveyed the very soul of the place they both called home. Nathan's expression softened as he took in the flowers she offered. He set his brush down and gently accepted the bouquet, his fingers brushing against hers in a fleeting moment that sent a jolt of warmth through her. With that simple act, a bridge solidified between them, the unspoken words hanging in the air, heavy with meaning. He gestured toward the canvas, inviting her to admire his work. Emily studied the painting, mesmerized by how he had captured the shimmering reflections of the lake and the way the light filtered through the trees. She could see herself within the scene, the connection she felt to the landscape reflected in his artistry. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting a golden hue over everything, they shared a quiet companionship, each absorbed in their own thoughts, yet united by an invisible thread. The world around them faded, leaving only the beauty of the moment, the promise of spring filling the air with a sweet fragrance. Nathan returned to his work, a new vigor in his strokes, and Emily, unable to contain her excitement, began gathering more wildflowers. She worked quickly, arranging them into small bouquets, her heart fluttering with the thought of presenting them to him. She reveled in the idea of sharing this simple pleasure with him, of extending their bond into something more tangible. With each bouquet, she felt a surge of hope, envisioning a future filled with color and light, one where their lives intertwined like the vines in her garden. The warmth of the sun on her back infused her with energy, and she decided to surprise him by decorating his porch with the flowers. With a final flourish, she completed the last arrangement and laid them out across the weathered wood of his porch. Each bouquet was unique, representing her feelings and the shared beauty of their surroundings. As she finished, she turned to see Nathan stepping out, paintbrush in hand, his eyes widening at the sight before him. He took in the flowers with a smile, his expression revealing his delight. In that moment, Emily felt a rush of warmth, a realization that they had crossed a threshold. The gifts of spring, of new life, of blooming beauty, spoke of the promise they had begun to forge together. Nathan stepped closer, his gaze shifting from the flowers to her, and for the first time, Emily felt the weight of silence shift into something more intimate, more profound. The air crackled with potential, the world around them fading into the background as they stood there, sharing the moment in silent understanding. Without thinking, she stepped toward him, drawn by an invisible pull. The gap between them closed, and in that shared space, they lingered. Her heart raced as she reached out, brushing her fingertips against the petals of the flowers, allowing the moment to expand, to linger just a little longer. With the golden light wrapping around them, she realized that the bridge they were building was made not just of silence, but of shared experiences and emotions. The promise of spring whispered in the rustle of leaves, in the flutter of petals, and in the warmth of their connection. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape, Emily and Nathan stood together on the cusp of something beautiful. The world around them was alive with possibility, a vibrant tapestry woven with threads of hope, love, and newfound beginnings. Together, they stepped onto that bridge, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. Chapter 14. The Road to Rediscovery. As the days of spring turned into warm evenings, Emily found herself enchanted by the beauty of the nights in her small village. Each evening, the sun would set in a blaze of oranges and pinks, casting a magical glow over the landscape. The stars would begin to twinkle in the deepening sky, and a cool breeze would dance through the air, carrying the scents of blooming flowers and fresh grass. One evening, after a long day of tending to her garden and savoring the pleasure of her budding friendship with Nathan, she decided to invite him to a starlit picnic by the lake. The idea filled her with a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. It was a chance to share something special, a moment that could deepen their bond. Emily spent the afternoon preparing for their picnic. She baked a batch of lemon scones, her kitchen filled with the warm scent of citrus and sweetness. She carefully packed a wicker basket with the scones, fresh fruit, and a thermos of her favorite herbal tea. With each item she selected, she envisioned the soft laughter and shared stories that might accompany the meal, the way their eyes would light up under the stars. As dusk approached, Emily set out to the lake, the path winding through the tall grass and wildflowers. The sun dipped lower, creating a silken blanket of twilight, and the first stars began to twinkle overhead. The lake lay before her, a shimmering expanse that mirrored the sky, and she felt a thrill of joy at the thought of sharing this moment with Nathan. She chose a spot on the shore, where the grass was soft and the view of the sky was unobstructed. Emily spread out a plaid blanket, arranging the food and setting the scene for a cozy evening. The tranquil sound of the water lapping against the shore added a soothing soundtrack to the moment. Minutes later, she spotted Nathan making his way down the path, his silhouette illuminated by the fading light. He carried a small canvas bag, and Emily's heart raced at the sight of him. He approached with a gentle smile, his eyes sparkling with curiosity and delight at the scene she had created. Emily gestured toward the blanket, inviting him to sit beside her. The two settled down, the blanket creating a cocoon of warmth as they began to share the meal. The scones were light and fluffy, and they paired perfectly with the sweet strawberries she had brought. With each bite, Emily felt more at ease, the delicious food serving as a bridge to further connection. As they ate, Nathan glanced up at the sky, his expression shifting from delight to awe. Emily followed his gaze, her breath catching in her throat as she took in the beauty of the stars. The night sky was a canvas of shimmering lights, constellations swirling above like ancient stories woven into the fabric of the universe. In the quiet moments that followed, they both reveled in the stillness, their hearts beating in time with the rhythm of the night. The stars seemed to whisper secrets, inviting them to share their thoughts and dreams. Emily felt the urge to reach for his hand, to anchor herself in this moment of wonder. As if sensing her desire, Nathan shifted closer. Their shoulders brushed together, a gentle reminder of the bond they had forged. He pulled out a small sketchbook from his bag, revealing pages filled with intricate drawings of the very stars that lit up the night sky. Each sketch was a testament to his artistic talent, capturing the essence of the cosmos with stunning detail. Emily leaned in closer, captivated by his work. Nathan flipped through the pages, revealing scenes of distant galaxies, shooting stars, and the constellations that adorned the night. She could see the passion in his eyes, the way he became lost in the beauty of the universe as he shared his sketches with her. Each drawing was a reflection of his heart, and she felt honored to be part of this moment. As the night deepened, the stars twinkled brighter, casting a silver glow over everything. The air grew cooler, but Emily felt warm beside Nathan. The connection between them felt tangible, a force that pulsed with unspoken words and emotions. They sat in comfortable silence, both lost in their thoughts and the magic of the night. Suddenly, a shooting star streaked across the sky, trailing a brilliant light behind it. Emily gasped, her heart racing with exhilaration. It was a breathtaking moment, and she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the beauty surrounding her. She closed her eyes and made a silent wish, her heart full of hope and longing. Nathan turned to her, a knowing smile playing on his lips. He had seen her reaction, and in that moment, she realized that they were both swept up in the wonder of the universe. The stars above seemed to mirror their feelings, a cosmic dance of possibilities. With the night unfolding around them, Nathan pulled out a small flashlight and began to point out different constellations. He traced the outlines of the stars with his finger, his enthusiasm infectious. Emily listened intently, absorbing every word as he shared the stories behind the constellations and the myths that had been passed down through generations. As the hours slipped away, the world around them faded, leaving only the two of them beneath the vast expanse of the night sky. The bond they had formed felt deep and unshakable, strengthened by shared moments and whispered secrets. When they finally turned their gaze back to the lake, Emily saw the water reflecting the stars, creating a dreamlike tableau that seemed to extend infinitely. The beauty of the scene overwhelmed her, and she realized that this was not just a picnic. It was the beginning of something extraordinary. As the cool night air wrapped around them, Nathan reached out, brushing his fingers against hers. The simple touch sent a thrill through her, igniting a warmth that spread from her fingertips to her heart. They exchanged glances, and in that moment, Emily understood that their connection had transformed into something deeper. With the stars shining brightly above, they continued to share stories and dreams, the boundaries between their lives blurring as they opened up to one another. The promise of a new beginning, of love blossoming under the watchful gaze of the universe, filled the air around them. Eventually, as the night drew to a close and the first light of dawn began to paint the horizon, Emily felt a profound sense of peace. She and Nathan had crossed a threshold, moving beyond the hurt of their pasts and stepping into a future filled with hope and love. As they packed up their picnic, the gentle breeze whispered through the trees, carrying with it the echoes of laughter and shared dreams. Emily looked up at Nathan, her heart swelling with gratitude for this moment, for the connection they had forged, and for the love that was beginning to bloom. Together, they walked back along the path, hand in hand, the stars fading behind them, but the memory of the night etched in their hearts forever. Beneath the starry sky, they had discovered a love that felt destined, a promise that would guide them through the seasons to come. Chapter 15. A Blossoming Love. As summer unfurled its golden embrace over the village, Emily felt a newfound energy coursing through her. Each day brought the promise of warmth, the sun casting a radiant glow on her garden, which was now bursting with color and life. The flowers bloomed in vibrant hues, their fragrances mingling in the air like a sweet symphony. It was as if nature was celebrating her burgeoning relationship with Nathan, each petal and leaf echoing the joy blossoming in her heart. The days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, Emily and Nathan grew closer. They spent afternoons exploring the meandering trails of the countryside, where wildflowers danced in the breeze and birds sang their melodious tunes. Every hike became an adventure, filled with laughter and discovery, as they shared stories of their childhoods, dreams, and aspirations. The conversations flowed as easily as the streams they often crossed, and Emily felt a profound sense of belonging in Nathan's presence. One particularly sunny afternoon, they decided to visit a nearby orchard known for its ripe peaches and fragrant blossoms. The orchard was a hidden gem, a place where time seemed to slow down and the world melted away. As they walked among the trees, their fingers brushed against the soft petals, and Emily was entranced by the beauty surrounding her. The branches hung heavy with fruit, golden and warm in the sunlight, beckoning them to taste the sweetness of summer. Nathan picked a peach and held it out to Emily, a playful glint in his eyes. She accepted the fruit, their fingers lingering for a moment longer than necessary, igniting a spark that sent butterflies dancing in her stomach. They sat beneath a sprawling tree, the shade offering respite from the sun's warmth. Emily took a bite of the juicy peach, the sweet nectar bursting in her mouth. As she savored the flavor, Nathan leaned back against the tree trunk, his gaze fixed on her. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows across his face, and in that moment, Emily saw a tenderness in his eyes that made her heart flutter. He had become a constant presence in her life, and with each shared experience, she felt her walls beginning to crumble. After finishing the peach, they lay back on the grass, the gentle rustle of leaves above them creating a calming melody. Emily felt an overwhelming sense of peace, a feeling that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The past, its shadows and heartaches, began to fade away, replaced by the warmth of Nathan's friendship and the promise of something deeper. With the sun high in the sky, they spent the afternoon in a comfortable silence, allowing the beauty of the orchard to envelop them. Time seemed to stand still as they watched the clouds drift lazily overhead, their shapes shifting and morphing into fantastical figures. Emily found herself sharing a childhood story, her voice soft as she recounted the adventures she and her sister used to have in their backyard. Nathan listened intently, his expression one of genuine interest, as if every word she spoke was a treasure to him. As the sun began its descent, casting a warm golden glow across the orchard, Nathan suggested they pick some peaches to take home. Emily eagerly agreed, and together they wandered among the trees, filling their baskets with the ripest fruits. With each peach they selected, they shared playful banter, their laughter echoing through the rows of trees. It felt as though the world outside had vanished, leaving only the two of them in their own little paradise. Eventually, as the sky turned to shades of pink and orange, they found themselves sitting on the edge of the orchard, overlooking a small pond that glimmered like glass in the fading light. The air was rich with the scent of peaches, and the sweet song of crickets began to fill the evening. Emily felt a longing in her heart, a desire to express the feelings that had been growing within her like the blossoms surrounding them. As the first stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Nathan reached over and took her hand, his grip warm and reassuring. Emily felt her breath hitch in her throat, a mixture of excitement and vulnerability coursing through her. The connection between them was palpable, a thread woven by the moments they had shared, the laughter, and the quiet understanding that blossomed like the flowers in her garden. Nathan turned to her, his gaze serious yet tender. Emily could see the depth of his feelings reflected in his eyes, a mirror to her own heart. In that moment, surrounded by the beauty of nature and the shimmering stars above, she knew that this was the moment to let go of her fears and embrace the love that had taken root within her. With a deep breath, she leaned closer, their foreheads touching, and for a brief moment, the world around them faded into a soft blur. Time slowed, the night wrapping around them like a warm blanket, and Emily felt the weight of her past lifting. In Nathan's presence, she found a sanctuary, a place where she could be vulnerable and open. Their lips met softly, a hesitant yet electrifying touch that ignited a fire within her. The kiss was gentle, filled with the sweetness of newfound love, and as they melted into one another, the stars above seemed to shimmer brighter, echoing the feelings blooming between them. It was a kiss of promise, a seal on the bond they had formed. As they pulled away, their eyes locked, and Emily could see the unspoken words lingering between them. In that silence, she felt a surge of hope and joy, knowing that they had crossed a threshold into a new chapter of their lives. The love that had begun to blossom was not just a fleeting moment. It was a foundation upon which they could build a future together. Over the following days, their love continued to flourish, nurtured by shared experiences and quiet moments spent in each other's company. They explored the countryside, indulged in picnics by the lake, and returned to the orchard to pick peaches. Each day felt like a new adventure, filled with laughter and warmth. Emily found herself increasingly drawn to Nathan, not only for the connection they shared, but also for the man he was. He was kind and gentle, his laughter infectious, and he had a way of making her feel cherished. With him, she discovered a sense of freedom, a release from the burdens of her past, and she felt ready to embrace the life that lay ahead. As summer continued to paint the world in vibrant colors, Emily realized that love had transformed her, wrapping her in a cocoon of hope and healing. She had opened her heart again, allowing the warmth of Nathan's love to seep in, replacing the shadows of betrayal that had once held her captive. Underneath the summer sky, surrounded by blooming flowers and the scent of ripe peaches, Emily found herself on the brink of a beautiful new chapter. A chapter filled with love, promise, and the blossoming of a future that felt brighter than she had ever dared to imagine. Chapter 16. A Heart Reawakened. As summer began to wane, casting a gentle warmth over the village, Emily felt a subtle shift in the air. The days, once stretched long with sunlight, now slipped toward early twilight, and the evenings carried a hint of coolness that whispered of autumn's approach. Despite the changing season, Emily's heart felt light, buoyed by her blossoming relationship with Nathan. Yet, with this newfound joy also came the lurking shadows of her past, memories that whispered like distant echoes in the back of her mind. The days they had spent together were a tapestry of vibrant moments, laughter shared over picnics, gentle kisses under starlit skies, and quiet afternoons in the orchard. Emily had allowed herself to dream of a future filled with love and hope. However, the scars of her past still lingered, and she found herself grappling with the remnants of betrayal that had once shattered her world. One late afternoon, she decided to visit the small cafe nestled at the edge of the village, a quaint place she had frequented with her husband before the fractures in their marriage became too evident to ignore. As she entered, the familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee enveloped her, stirring memories of happier times. The cafe was nearly empty, the warm, inviting ambience contrasting sharply with the turmoil inside her heart. Sitting at a small table by the window, Emily watched the world outside. The vibrant hues of the flowers that lined the street seemed to mock her inner turmoil. With each passing moment, she felt a deep sense of unease. It was here that she had once shared dreams and plans with a man who had betrayed her trust, leaving her heart in tatters. Yet, as the sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, she realized that this place, once a symbol of her past, no longer held power over her. As she sipped her coffee, she noticed a couple seated nearby, their laughter filling the air like music. They were entwined in conversation, their hands brushing against each other, a silent promise of affection shared between them. Emily felt a pang of longing, a bittersweet reminder of what she had lost and what she had gained. The warmth of Nathan's love had become her refuge, but the past still haunted her, its echoes a constant reminder of the hurt she had endured. Finishing her coffee, Emily stood to leave, her heart heavy yet resolute. The cafe door creaked open, and she stepped into the fading sunlight, the air crisp against her skin. As she walked back through the village, she passed familiar landmarks. Each corner, each building held fragments of her memories. Yet, this time, she walked with purpose, determined to reclaim her life from the shadows that had once consumed her. That evening, Nathan invited Emily to his home for dinner. The warmth of his smile and the kindness in his eyes enveloped her, easing the remnants of anxiety that had plagued her throughout the day. They cooked together, laughter spilling from the kitchen as they fumbled with ingredients, flour dusting their faces. In those moments, Emily felt a lightness in her heart, as if the burdens she had carried were finally lifting. As they shared a meal, the cozy glow of candlelight cast flickering shadows on the walls, creating a sense of intimacy that wrapped around them like a warm embrace. Emily watched Nathan as he spoke, his passion evident in every gesture, his laughter infectious. He had a way of making her feel seen, cherished, and valued, and with each passing moment, her heart opened further to the possibility of love. After dinner, they moved to the small balcony that overlooked the village. The sky was painted in hues of purple and gold, the sun setting in a glorious display of color. They settled into comfortable silence, their fingers intertwined, and Emily felt a sense of peace wash over her. In Nathan's presence, she found solace, a refuge from the tumult of her past. As they sat side by side, the stillness of the night surrounded them, and Emily felt the urge to share her fears. She wanted Nathan to understand the scars that lingered within her, the shadows that occasionally crept back into her mind. Yet, as she looked at him, she hesitated. Would he see her past as a burden, or would he embrace her wholly, including the wounds that still ached? In the weeks that followed, Emily found herself grappling with this internal struggle. She had begun to envision a life with Nathan, but the weight of her past still felt like an anchor, holding her back. Despite the joy he brought her, she feared that revealing her history might shatter the delicate bond they had built. One evening, while browsing through old photo albums, she stumbled upon images of her life with her ex-husband. Smiling faces, sunlit days, moments frozen in time that now felt tainted by betrayal. Each picture tugged at her heart, a reminder of what she had lost. In those moments, the echoes of the past grew louder, and she felt the need to confront them. Determined to face her fears, Emily decided it was time to open up to Nathan. She could no longer allow the ghosts of her past to haunt her future. She needed him to see all of her, the joyful moments, the pain, and the strength that had emerged from it. The next day, she invited Nathan for a quiet afternoon at her home. As she prepared for his arrival, anxiety bubbled beneath the surface. She set the table with care, arranging fresh flowers in a vase, hoping to create an inviting atmosphere. Yet, her heart raced with uncertainty, the weight of her past looming over her. When Nathan arrived, he greeted her with a warm smile that made her heart flutter. They shared a light lunch, the conversation flowing easily between them. Yet Emily's thoughts raced as she tried to find the right moment to reveal her truth. Every laugh, every glance felt tinged with the fear of what would happen if she let him in completely. As they moved to the living room, Emily felt the urgency to speak, to share the echoes that had haunted her for so long. The sunlight streamed through the window, casting a warm glow across the room, illuminating the space where she hoped to bare her soul. Nathan settled onto the couch, his gaze steady and inviting, and in that moment, she knew she had to take the leap. Taking a deep breath, Emily began to share her story, allowing the words to flow like a river breaking through a dam. She recounted the moments of joy that had turned to heartache, the betrayal that had shattered her trust, and the journey of healing that had followed. With each revelation, she felt the weight of her past lift, the echoes fading into a soft whisper as Nathan listened intently, his eyes never leaving hers. In his presence, she felt understood and accepted. Nathan did not shy away from the pain she had endured. Instead, he embraced it, holding space for her to share her truth. With every word she spoke, the bond between them deepened, woven with threads of vulnerability and honesty. As she finished, silence enveloped them, a sacred space where understanding and empathy lingered. Emily felt a mixture of fear and relief wash over her. She had taken a step into the unknown, and in that moment, she realized that love could thrive even amidst the shadows of the past. Nathan reached for her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. He did not offer empty platitudes or try to dismiss her pain. Instead, he simply held her hand, a silent promise that he would be there to support her as she continued her journey of healing. In that moment, Emily felt a sense of freedom, a release from the chains of her past that had held her captive for so long. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden light across the room, Emily realized that the echoes of her past no longer defined her. They were a part of her story, yes, but they did not hold power over her future. With Nathan by her side, she felt empowered to embrace the possibilities that lay ahead, the love that blossomed between them stronger than any shadow that dared to linger. In the days that followed, Emily continued to confront her past, allowing the echoes to soften as she filled her heart with the warmth of Nathan's love. Together, they explored the beauty of their blossoming relationship, forging a path toward a future that shimmered with hope and possibility. With every step, Emily felt lighter, the burden of her past lifting, replaced by the promise of a love that would endure. Chapter 17. A Heart Divided. As autumn settled over the village, the landscape transformed into a vibrant tapestry of reds, oranges, and yellows. The once bright greens of summer faded, giving way to a new kind of beauty that spoke of change and reflection. Emily felt the shift not just in the air but within her heart. She had opened herself to Nathan, allowing him to see the fragments of her past, yet the echoes of her former life still reverberated in her soul, casting shadows over her newfound happiness. With the onset of fall, a lingering unease began to creep back into her heart. While she had shared her story with Nathan and felt a weight lift, the memories of her past remained, tethered to her like a forgotten melody that played softly in the background. The deeper she fell for Nathan, the more pronounced her fears became. Was she truly ready to embrace a future with him? Could she allow herself to love without the shadows of betrayal haunting her? As the days turned cooler, Emily found solace in the routines she shared with Nathan. They spent weekends exploring the countryside, where the golden leaves crunched beneath their feet, and afternoons in local cafes, where the warmth of coffee and pastries wrapped around them like a cozy blanket. Each moment felt precious, yet the tug of her past was a constant reminder of the vulnerability she carried. One brisk Saturday afternoon, they ventured to a pumpkin patch on the outskirts of the village. The air was crisp, the sky a brilliant blue, and the sun cast a golden glow over the patch, illuminating the vibrant orange pumpkins that dotted the landscape. Laughter erupted from children playing nearby, and the scent of freshly baked apple pie wafted through the air. Emily felt a sense of joy bubble within her, yet a small voice in her mind whispered caution, urging her to protect her heart. As they walked through the rows of pumpkins, Emily's thoughts drifted to her ex-husband, Derek. The memories of their time together felt distant yet vivid. She recalled the moments that had led her to this point, the late nights spent discussing their dreams, the laughter they had shared, and the quiet moments that now felt tainted by the pain of betrayal. She felt a strange sense of loyalty to the love they once had, even as it crumbled around her. How could she fully embrace this new chapter with Nathan when echoes of her past lingered like ghosts, waiting to remind her of her heartache? Nathan, sensing her distraction, reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. The warmth of his touch sparked a flicker of reassurance in her heart. He led her toward a massive pumpkin, one that stood out among the others. Its size was impressive, and as they approached, Emily couldn't help but smile at Nathan's playful enthusiasm as he attempted to lift it. It was in these small moments of joy that she found comfort, yet the internal struggle remained. A heart divided between the past and the promise of the future. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting a warm glow over the patch, they decided to pick a pumpkin to carve later. Emily found herself drawn to the vibrant hues and imperfect shapes, a reflection of her own journey. A journey filled with ups and downs, beauty and imperfection. She picked a pumpkin that was slightly misshapen but still full of potential, and together, they carried it back to the car. Later that evening, as they settled in for a cozy night of pumpkin carving, the warm glow of candles flickered around them, casting playful shadows on the walls. Nathan set out tools and paints, his eyes sparkling with excitement. Emily watched him, a smile tugging at her lips as he immersed himself in the task at hand. Yet, as she began to carve, her mind wandered again to Derek. She recalled the nights spent carving pumpkins together, the way he had once filled their home with laughter and love. The juxtaposition of these memories felt heavy, a reminder of what had been lost. As the knife glided through the pumpkin's flesh, Emily felt a swell of emotion, frustration, sadness, and a longing for closure. She took a deep breath, focusing on the task at hand, but her heart felt the weight of the unspoken words swirling within her. Nathan, immersed in his own carving, was blissfully unaware of the internal battle raging inside her. In the glow of the flickering candlelight, Emily's gaze drifted toward Nathan, who was now adorned with bits of pumpkin guts smeared across his cheeks. His laughter rang out, warm and genuine, echoing in her heart. In that moment, she felt a spark of realization. Nathan was not a replacement for Derek. He was a new chapter, a chance to redefine love on her own terms. Yet, the remnants of her past clung stubbornly, refusing to fade quietly into the background. As the evening unfolded, Emily found herself lost in the dance of their laughter and shared joy. The pumpkin transformed under their hands, becoming a vessel for their creativity. As they illuminated the carved design with a flickering candle, Emily felt the warm glow radiating around them, a symbol of the love they were nurturing together. After they finished, they sat back on the couch, admiring their handiwork. The light from the carved pumpkin flickered gently, illuminating Nathan's face in a warm, golden hue. Yet, even in this serene moment, Emily felt a deep ache in her heart. As Nathan turned to her, a soft smile gracing his lips, Emily was struck by the realization that her heart was still divided. The next day, while walking through the village, she found herself at the edge of a serene lake that reflected the autumn trees in a brilliant array of colors. She often visited this spot to find clarity, and today was no different. Sitting on a bench overlooking the water, she let her thoughts flow freely, allowing the gentle breeze to carry away the weight of her worries. As she watched the leaves fall, a thought crossed her mind. Could she truly let go of her past? Could she embrace Nathan wholeheartedly, knowing that he offered a love different from what she had known? The internal battle between holding on and letting go raged within her, and as she sat in silence, she felt the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. She closed her eyes, envisioning a life unburdened by the echoes of betrayal, a life where love flourished in the absence of fear, where she could be vulnerable without reservations. It was a powerful image, yet the path to that vision felt obscured by the memories that lingered. Each recollection of Derek and their time together was a reminder of her vulnerability, a tether she found difficult to sever. Just then, a soft rustle nearby caught her attention. She opened her eyes to see a group of children playing by the water's edge, their laughter ringing out like music, carefree and innocent. In that moment, Emily felt a rush of warmth and hope. It struck her that love, like life, was a series of moments that could not be defined by a singular experience. The laughter of the children reminded her that joy could be found even amidst pain, and perhaps love could be rebuilt layer by layer, without the shadows of her past overshadowing it. Returning home, she felt a renewed sense of determination. That evening, she invited Nathan to watch the stars. They set up a blanket in the backyard, nestled beneath a canopy of twinkling lights that glittered like diamonds against the night sky. As they lay side by side, the weight of her earlier turmoil began to lift. The universe felt vast and full of possibilities, each star a reminder that life continued beyond pain and heartache. In that moment, Emily understood that it was time to make a choice. She could either allow her past to control her future or embrace the present with open arms. As Nathan's hand found hers, warm and steady, she felt a surge of love radiate through her. The stars above sparkled brightly, mirroring the hope that blossomed within her heart. As the days turned into weeks, Emily embraced the beauty of her new reality, allowing Nathan's love to seep into the cracks left by her past. With each shared experience, she found herself healing, piece by piece, the echoes of her former life gradually fading into a distant memory. Yet, despite the progress she made, there were moments when the past threatened to intrude, whispers of doubt and insecurity that crept into her mind. Emily learned to recognize these moments, grounding herself in the present, finding solace in Nathan's unwavering support. Together, they built a life filled with laughter, warmth, and an understanding that love, like the seasons, could bloom anew even after the harshest winters. But deep inside, Emily knew that to fully embrace her future, she would need to confront Derek one last time. The echoes of her past still held a piece of her heart captive, and she realized that true liberation lay in seeking closure. She would confront him, not for reconciliation, but for herself, to reclaim the final pieces of her heart and step forward into the love that awaited her. With this newfound clarity, Emily prepared for the confrontation that would inevitably come, feeling both anxious and empowered. It was a necessary step toward healing, a chance to let go of the final remnants of her past and step boldly into the love that awaited her in the arms of Nathan. Chapter 18. A Love Unexpected. The days turned into weeks, and the warmth of autumn began to wane, ushering in the crisp chill of early winter. Emily felt the weight of the season's shift pressing down on her shoulders, a mix of anticipation and anxiety as she prepared for her meeting with Derek. The leaves, once vibrant and full of life, were now brittle and scattered, much like the remnants of her past that she sought to confront and bury once and for all. With each passing day, her resolve grew stronger. The comfort of Nathan's love enveloped her, a soft cocoon that provided warmth amid the cold uncertainty she faced. Yet, deep within her heart, the fear of facing Derek loomed like a dark cloud. She envisioned their meeting as a battle, a clash between the ghosts of her past and the love she now cherished. One gray morning, with the promise of snow in the air, Emily decided it was time. She dressed carefully, selecting a deep burgundy sweater that felt like a warm embrace and jeans that hugged her figure comfortably. As she glanced in the mirror, she caught a glimpse of her reflection, a mixture of strength and vulnerability swirling in her hazel eyes. Today would be a day of closure, she reminded herself, a day to reclaim her narrative. Arriving at Derek's apartment was like stepping into a time capsule, a space that held both fond memories and painful reminders. The building stood tall and unyielding, its facade weathered by time, but still maintaining an air of familiarity. Emily's heart raced as she climbed the stairs, each step a reminder of the life she had once shared with Derek. The door creaked open, revealing the same cluttered living room that had once been filled with laughter and love, but now felt like a shadow of what it had once been. Derek stood at the entrance, a mixture of surprise and wariness etched on his face. Time had changed him, and as she entered the room, she noticed the weariness in his eyes, something that mirrored her own struggles. She took a moment to collect her thoughts, focusing on the memories of their shared life that flooded her mind. The vacations they took, the quiet evenings spent together, and the dreams they had woven into the fabric of their lives. Those memories now felt tainted, overshadowed by the betrayal that had shattered their bond. As she stood in the living room, the weight of her past settled heavily on her shoulders. The echoes of laughter that once filled this space now felt distant, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that hung in the air. Emily knew this confrontation was necessary. She needed to unearth the emotions that had kept her bound to Derek, to face the man who had once held her heart, and to reclaim her power. Derek motioned for her to sit, and she did, the familiarity of the worn couch engulfing her as memories flooded back. She felt the pull of nostalgia, yet beneath that nostalgia lay an undeniable sense of hurt and betrayal. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft hum of the heating system and the distant sound of traffic outside. Emily's gaze fell to the coffee table, where remnants of their past lay scattered. A forgotten book, a half-drunk cup of coffee, and a photo frame turned face down. The sight of the photo struck her like a jolt of electricity, igniting a wave of emotions she thought she had buried. It was a snapshot from a happier time, one that seemed almost surreal in its innocence. She inhaled deeply, the air thick with unspoken words. The confrontation was not just about confronting Derek. It was about confronting herself. She needed to find her voice, to articulate the pain that had haunted her for so long, to release the shackles of guilt that bound her to the memories of their time together. With a determined gaze, she finally met Derek's eyes. The moment hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truths. She felt a surge of emotions, a mix of anger, sadness, and relief. Here, in this moment, she had the chance to finally articulate what had weighed her down for so long. In her mind, she began to speak. She envisioned the words spilling out, how he had betrayed her trust, how the love they once shared had turned into a nightmare. She thought of the nights spent crying, the days when her heart felt heavy and fractured. Emily imagined telling him how his choices had not only hurt her, but had shattered the life they had built together, leaving her grappling with the pieces alone. As she sat there, her heart racing, she felt the shadows of the past inching closer. Would he take responsibility for his actions? Would he understand the depth of her pain? The questions swirled like a tempest in her mind, battling against the resolve she had built. After what felt like an eternity, Derek finally broke the silence, his voice a low rumble filled with regret. Yet, Emily remained silent, letting his words wash over her. She didn't want to hear the excuses, the justifications, or the half-hearted apologies that might slip from his lips. What she needed was clarity, a moment of closure that could help her step forward. Derek began to speak, but Emily blocked out the sound, focusing on her own thoughts and feelings. She pictured Nathan, the warmth of his touch, the kindness in his eyes, the laughter they shared. Nathan had seen her in a way that Derek had never bothered to appreciate. He had embraced her flaws and helped her understand the beauty of vulnerability. Nathan represented a new beginning, a chance to love and be loved without the weight of betrayal clinging to her heart. In the stillness of that moment, Emily felt the pieces of her heart begin to fall into place. She envisioned herself walking away from Derek, not with anger, but with a sense of peace. The final confrontation was less about Derek and more about her journey toward healing. Suddenly, she rose from the couch, the movement infused with a sense of finality. As she stepped toward the door, a wave of relief washed over her. She no longer felt the need to carry the weight of her past. The darkness that had lingered for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a flicker of hope and renewal. Derek's gaze followed her, filled with confusion and perhaps a hint of desperation. But Emily had made her choice. She would not allow herself to be ensnared by the remnants of a love that had turned bitter. The air felt lighter as she opened the door, stepping into the cool embrace of winter. Outside, snowflakes began to fall gently from the sky, landing softly on her hair and shoulders. Each flake felt like a fresh start, a cleansing of the past, a promise of new beginnings. As she walked away from the apartment, her heart surged with a newfound sense of freedom. She was ready to leave behind the shadows that had once dictated her life. With each step, Emily felt lighter, as if the burdens she had carried for so long were falling away, leaving space for hope and love to blossom anew. The warmth of Nathan's embrace awaited her, a comforting reminder that life continued to move forward, unburdened by the echoes of yesterday. As she made her way home, the world around her transformed. The trees, once bare, now donned a fresh coat of white, their branches glistening in the afternoon light. The beauty of the landscape reflected the transformation taking place within her, a rebirth, a reclamation of her heart. Returning to the cozy warmth of her home, Emily found Nathan in the kitchen, preparing a simple dinner. The scent of herbs and roasted vegetables filled the air, creating an atmosphere of warmth and comfort. She felt an overwhelming rush of gratitude as she watched him move about the kitchen, the sight of him grounding her in the present. In that moment, she realized that love had the power to heal. The journey to reclaim her heart had been fraught with challenges, but here she was, standing on the precipice of a new beginning. As she stepped into the kitchen, Nathan turned, his eyes lighting up at the sight of her. In the silence that enveloped them, Emily knew that this was where she belonged. No longer shackled by the weight of her past, she embraced the future with open arms, ready to let love guide her forward. Chapter 19. The Heart's Return. The snow continued to fall softly outside, blanketing the world in a serene layer of white. As Emily stood in the kitchen, the warmth radiating from the oven felt like a comforting embrace, wrapping around her and easing the remnants of tension from her shoulders. Nathan was in the midst of preparing dinner, his movements fluid and confident, and the sight of him brought a smile to her lips. It was in these moments of domesticity that Emily found solace, a sense of belonging that she had long yearned for. After her confrontation with Derek, a profound sense of clarity settled over Emily. The decision to confront her past was a significant step in her healing journey, but now she was ready to embrace the future. The shadows of regret and pain began to recede, replaced by a growing anticipation for what lay ahead. Dinner was a cozy affair, filled with the delightful aromas of roasted vegetables and seasoned chicken. As they sat together at the small dining table, candlelight flickered gently, casting soft shadows on the walls. Each bite was savored, the flavors reminding Emily of the warmth and love that permeated their home. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for Nathan, who had become her anchor amidst the storms of her life. After dinner, they migrated to the living room, where a fire crackled invitingly in the hearth. Nathan wrapped a blanket around them, and as they settled into the couch, Emily felt an overwhelming sense of peace envelop her. The comforting rhythm of their shared silence spoke volumes, and she nestled against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her. As the evening wore on, Emily's thoughts drifted to the plans they had made for the upcoming holiday season. She envisioned their little apartment transformed into a winter wonderland, adorned with twinkling lights and festive decorations. This would be their first holiday season together, a chance to create new traditions that were free from the burdens of the past. In her mind, she began to craft a list of everything she wanted to do during the holidays. Ice skating in the park, baking cookies together, and visiting the local Christmas market were all experiences she longed to share with Nathan. Each thought brought a smile to her face, igniting a sense of childlike excitement within her. But the most significant plan she had was to invite her family over for a Christmas dinner. Emily had always cherished the time spent with her family during the holidays, and after everything that had transpired with Derek, she felt it was time to bridge the gap that had formed between them. The thought of bringing her family together in a spirit of love and acceptance filled her with warmth. As she snuggled deeper into Nathan's embrace, Emily's heart swelled with hope. This new chapter of her life was filled with promise, and she was determined to embrace every moment fully. Together, they would build a life rich with experiences, laughter, and love. The next day, Emily set about planning their holiday festivities. She created a checklist, noting down the decorations they would need, the ingredients for their baking endeavors, and ideas for gifts. The anticipation of the upcoming celebrations filled her with energy, and she couldn't wait to bring Nathan into her world more fully. On the weekend, they ventured out together to gather decorations for their home. The local market was bustling with activity, vibrant stalls adorned with colorful lights and cheerful ornaments. Emily felt a childlike joy bubble within her as she selected twinkling fairy lights and garlands of evergreen. Nathan's laughter filled the air as they playfully debated the merits of various ornaments, and she cherished every moment of their light-hearted banter. As they made their way home, their arms laden with bags of festive decorations, Emily glanced at Nathan, his eyes sparkling with excitement. She realized that with him, the mundane moments became extraordinary. They returned to their apartment, laughter echoing through the hallways as they began transforming their space into a cozy haven. The following weeks flew by, filled with laughter, warmth, and an abundance of love. They spent evenings huddled on the couch, sipping hot cocoa and watching classic holiday films, the glow of the television mixing with the soft light of the fireplace. Emily felt as if she were in a dream, each moment more beautiful than the last. As Christmas approached, Emily felt the weight of her past lift more each day. She poured her heart into the preparations, decorating their home with care, making it a reflection of their love. The once stark walls were adorned with colorful ornaments, and the scent of freshly baked cookies filled the air. She relished the joy of creating new memories that would replace the painful ones that had lingered for far too long. On Christmas Eve, Emily's family arrived, filling their home with laughter and love. The atmosphere was vibrant, infused with the spirit of the season. As they gathered around the table for dinner, Emily felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She looked around at the faces of her family and Nathan, her heart swelling with gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this moment. After dinner, they exchanged gifts, the room filled with excited chatter and the crinkling of wrapping paper. Emily watched as Nathan interacted with her family, his genuine warmth bridging any gaps that had existed. In that moment, she realized how far she had come. The weight of her past had transformed into a tapestry of experiences that had shaped her, leading her to this beautiful present. As the evening wore on, Emily felt an overwhelming sense of belonging. She had created a home filled with love, one that was no longer tainted by betrayal. Her heart sang with joy as she basked in the laughter of those she held dear. The dark days of uncertainty felt like a distant memory, replaced by a future rich with promise. As midnight approached, they gathered around the fireplace, hot chocolate in hand, and shared stories, the flickering flames casting a warm glow on their faces. Emily listened intently as her family recounted their favorite holiday memories, laughter bubbling forth, mingling with the crackle of the fire. The sound felt like music, a melody that played in perfect harmony with her heart. When the clock struck midnight, Emily felt a surge of hope wash over her. It was a new beginning, a fresh start that marked not only the birth of Christ, but also the rebirth of her spirit. She closed her eyes for a moment, savoring the warmth that enveloped her, a warmth that had come to represent love, family, and resilience. In the stillness of that moment, Emily made a silent vow. She promised to continue embracing the journey ahead, to cherish the love that had blossomed in her heart, and to nurture the beautiful life she was building with Nathan. No longer would she allow the shadows of her past to dictate her future. She would walk forward with courage, love, and hope. As the evening drew to a close, Emily and Nathan stood together at the window, gazing out at the snow-covered world. The landscape glimmered under the light of the moon, a canvas of purity that reflected the transformation within her. She felt a sense of peace wash over her, knowing that she was exactly where she was meant to be. With Nathan by her side, she was ready to embrace whatever came next, ready to face life's challenges with love as her guiding force. The future stretched before her, a tapestry woven with the threads of hope, joy, and unwavering love. In that moment, she knew she had found her place in the world, an anchor amid the tides of change, a home filled with laughter, and a heart brimming with love. Chapter 20. A love that lasts forever. The first light of dawn filtered softly through the sheer curtains, casting a gentle glow across Emily's bedroom. The remnants of last night's festivities lingered in the air, the scent of pine from the Christmas tree mingling with the lingering sweetness of hot cocoa. As she stirred awake, Emily felt a profound sense of peace wash over her, a sensation that had become increasingly familiar in her life with Nathan. They had shared a magical Christmas Eve filled with laughter, love, and cherished memories. Now, as she stretched beneath the warmth of her blanket, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She felt gratitude for the life she had built, for the man who stood by her side, and for the family that had embraced him as one of their own. Rising from the bed, she glanced over at Nathan, who was still peacefully asleep. The gentle rise and fall of his chest was a rhythmic reminder of the love they had nurtured together. A soft smile tugged at Emily's lips as she took a moment to admire him, feeling a wave of affection wash over her. She tiptoed into the kitchen, careful not to disturb his slumber. The morning light illuminated the kitchen as she began preparing breakfast, a comforting ritual that had become a part of their daily lives. She hummed softly to herself, reflecting on the promise of a new day. With each crack of the egg and the sizzle of bacon in the pan, her heart swelled with anticipation for what the day would bring. After breakfast, Emily decided to surprise Nathan with a thoughtful gesture. She gathered a few decorations from their Christmas tree and set to work crafting a beautiful centerpiece for their dining table, a symbol of the life they were building together. As she arranged the pine branches, ornaments, and candles, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Once she was satisfied with her creation, Emily returned to the living room, where Nathan had finally emerged from his slumber. He stood at the window, gazing out at the winter wonderland beyond. The snow had blanketed the ground in a thick layer, transforming the landscape into a magical realm. His presence filled the room with warmth, and she felt an overwhelming surge of affection for him. As they enjoyed breakfast together, the conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and playful teasing. Emily reveled in the comfort of their relationship, the way Nathan understood her and cherished her. Each day spent together felt like an adventure, a new chapter unfolding in their love story. After breakfast, they decided to take a walk in the snowy wonderland outside. Bundled up in their warmest clothes, they ventured out, the cold air crisp and invigorating. The world was hushed, a serene blanket of white enveloping everything in sight. With each step, they left footprints behind, a reminder of their journey together. The park was alive with the laughter of children playing in the snow, building snowmen and having snowball fights. Emily watched with delight as Nathan joined in the fun, his childlike spirit shining through. They rolled a large snowball together, crafting an impressive snowman adorned with a scarf and a carrot nose. The joy on Nathan's face ignited a warmth within her heart, a reminder of the beauty found in simple moments. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, they found a quiet spot beneath a tall oak tree, its branches heavy with snow. They sat together, the world around them a picturesque scene straight out of a storybook. Emily leaned against Nathan, feeling the strength of his presence beside her. In that moment, time seemed to stand still. With each passing day, Emily's love for Nathan deepened. She reveled in the little things. The way he brushed his hair back, the sound of his laughter, the kindness in his eyes. Each moment they spent together solidified the bond they had forged, transforming it into something unbreakable. As they strolled back home, Emily felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She reflected on the challenges she had faced in her past, the moments of heartbreak and betrayal. But those experiences had led her to Nathan, to a love that felt pure and unwavering. She understood now that the pain had shaped her, had made her appreciate the beauty of the love she had found. The days turned into weeks, and the new year arrived with a fresh sense of possibility. Emily and Nathan spent evenings planning their future, discussing dreams and aspirations that ignited a fire within their hearts. They envisioned a life filled with adventure, laughter, and love, determined to create a home that welcomed joy and warmth. In the weeks that followed, Emily began to notice subtle changes within herself. The shadows of her past no longer haunted her. Instead, they had transformed into stepping stones that had paved the way for her present. She was becoming the person she had always wanted to be, strong, resilient, and filled with hope. One evening, as they prepared for a cozy night in, Emily felt an urge to express her feelings. She took Nathan by the hand and led him to the balcony, where the stars twinkled brightly against the night sky. The air was crisp, and a soft breeze danced around them. With her heart racing, she gazed up at the stars, feeling a sense of wonder and connection to the universe. Nathan wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. Emily felt the warmth of his embrace and took a deep breath, ready to share the depths of her heart. She expressed her gratitude for his unwavering support and love, how he had helped her heal and grow. Each word poured from her heart, a testament to the love that had blossomed between them. Nathan listened intently, his gaze never leaving hers. As she spoke, Emily felt a profound connection between them, a bond forged not only through shared experiences but also through mutual respect and understanding. The love they had cultivated was one that would withstand the test of time. Days turned into weeks, and their bond grew even stronger. Emily embraced the idea of building a future together, free from the constraints of her past. She found joy in planning a life that encompassed both their dreams, ensuring that their love would continue to flourish. With each passing day, Emily felt more grounded in her relationship with Nathan. They explored new places together, indulging in weekend getaways that deepened their connection. They created memories that would last a lifetime, from hiking through majestic mountains to quiet nights under the stars. As spring approached, the world began to bloom around them. Flowers burst forth from the earth, painting the landscape in vibrant colors. Emily felt a renewed sense of hope. a reminder of the beauty that could emerge after a long, cold winter. One afternoon, while walking hand in hand through a nearby botanical garden, Emily marveled at the flowers in full bloom. The air was fragrant with the scent of blossoms, and she felt a surge of happiness as she took in the beauty surrounding her. Nathan paused, drawing her attention to a particularly beautiful rose bush. Emily leaned closer, entranced by the delicate petals and vibrant colors. As she reached out to touch the petals, she felt a flutter of excitement in her chest. In that moment, she realized that their love was like this garden, nurtured with care, blossoming into something breathtaking. As they wandered through the garden, Nathan paused, taking Emily's hands in his. The sincerity in his eyes sent shivers down her spine. With a deep breath, he spoke without words, the connection between them deeper than any conversation. Emily felt the weight of unspoken promises and shared dreams. Later that evening, as they returned home, Emily reflected on their journey. She thought about the challenges they had faced and how they had emerged stronger, their love forged in the fires of adversity. She was filled with an overwhelming sense of gratitude for Nathan and the life they were building together. In the weeks that followed, they continued to nurture their relationship, creating a home filled with laughter and love. Emily poured herself into their life together, finding joy in the small moments, cooking dinner, sharing stories, and exploring the world hand in hand. As summer arrived, they planned a trip to the coast, eager to create new memories against the backdrop of sandy beaches and crashing waves. Emily felt a thrill of excitement as they packed their bags, ready to embark on an adventure together. The beach was a stunning expanse of golden sand and turquoise waters, and they reveled in the beauty of the ocean. With each wave that lapped at their feet, Emily felt her worries melt away, replaced by a sense of freedom and joy. They spent the days swimming in the sea, building sandcastles, and enjoying long walks along the shoreline. One evening, as the sun began to set, they found a quiet spot on the beach. The sky transformed into a canvas of oranges, pinks, and purples, casting a warm glow over everything. They sat together, the gentle sound of the waves creating a soothing melody. In that moment, Emily felt a deep sense of belonging. This was home, where her heart felt free. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Nathan turned to Emily, his eyes filled with a mixture of tenderness and sincerity. He reached for her hand, holding it tightly as they watched the sky change colors. In that stillness, the world faded away, and all that mattered was their connection. With the ocean as their witness, Nathan pulled Emily closer, his gaze unwavering. He had become her everything, a partner, a confidant, and a source of unwavering support. In that moment, she understood the depth of her love for him. As night fell, the stars twinkled overhead like diamonds scattered across the sky. Emily felt a surge of hope and excitement for the future that awaited them. They had created a love that felt unbreakable, one that would withstand any storm. Returning home from their trip, Emily felt invigorated and more in love than ever. The memories they had created were etched in her heart, a reminder of the beauty that life could offer. Each day became an opportunity to celebrate their love, to nurture it like the flowers in the garden they had visited. As summer faded into autumn, Emily and Nathan found themselves planning for the future once again. They talked about their dreams, aspirations, and the possibility of taking the next step in their relationship. Each conversation filled Emily with hope, and she felt a sense of excitement for the journey ahead. One chilly evening, while sipping warm cider by the fireplace, Emily felt a surge of determination. She was ready to embrace the next chapter of her life, ready to commit to Nathan fully. The love they had cultivated was strong, and she knew deep down that it was meant to last forever. In the following weeks, Emily began to envision their future together, creating a family, building a life filled with love, and continuing to support each other through every twist and turn. She felt a renewed sense of purpose as she planned for a future that held infinite possibilities. As autumn leaves began to fall, Emily took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. She wanted to express the depth of her feelings for Nathan, to show him just how much he meant to her. She felt a fire ignite within her, a desire to take the leap and share her heart fully. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, wrapped in a cozy blanket, Emily turned to Nathan. She felt the weight of unspoken words resting on her heart, ready to burst forth. With a deep breath, she took his hands in hers, the warmth of his touch sending shivers down her spine. As she gazed into his eyes, she realized that their love was a journey meant to be embraced, a journey filled with passion, growth, and unwavering support. She was ready to take the next step, to commit to a love that was destined to last forever. With every ounce of courage within her, Emily prepared to share her heart, to express the dreams she had for their future together. It was time to let love guide her, to embrace the beautiful life they had created.